Welcome, everybody. I call to order the 5 p.m. workshop. It's August 24th. No, it's not August 24th. It's the 14th. Got a little typo. Sorry, my fault. And we have two things on the agenda. The first up is a wildfire resiliency update. I did want to let everybody know, and the people on Zoom, if they're there, we are one counselor short. Gary Ross is not here with us. So there's 4 of us here. We have a quorum. And it looks like Matt Martin is going to start off the discussion. Or City Manager Wheeler, you can start it off too if you want.
Getting settled here. Matt will introduce our guests, who some of you may know. Kevin Moriarty from the county's been here before. Then Krista Appleby, thanks, is the assistant building official. Correct. Yeah. So as you might know, we contract our building official services for inspections through Deschutes County.
Can you use your mic, please? Thanks.
Of course. Sorry about that. And so they're joining us tonight to continue this work session, the series of work sessions we've had with the council about wildfire resiliency, building hardening, defensible spaces. But tonight we also want to talk about the draft map on wildfire risk that's been released now, and comments from communities, from individuals are due, I think, at the end of the week. So a lot of local jurisdictions are working on providing input. That's one of the questions we'll have for council during this work session, is any kind of feedback we want to supply back to the state on the draft map. So tonight's an opportunity to talk about the map, kind of go through it, and having a few experts here to kind of help through some of the questions about building codes, but also the process with the mapping and the updates. So turn it over to Matt, kind of give you the overview.
I think that was it.
Oh,
thank you for that.
We're done.
Matthew Martin, City of Sisters Principal Planner. Yeah, this is a continuation of our conversations regarding wildfire resiliency and mitigation. We last spoke, I think last fall, with some conversations about defensible space and home or building hardening, and some direction that the council gave at that time, which included pursuing updates to our defensible space code that looks at the state fire marshal's draft rules, as well as other options that go above and beyond that, and applying those to the community wide. And then also building hardening and efforts to adopt that citywide. That's allowed under Senate Bill 762 and Senate Bill 80 during the interim time period before the statewide wildfire hazard maps are adopted and implemented. And so coming back with an update on those processes and looking for more comments or direction as we move forward. Recognizing we have about 45 minutes, want to provide an opportunity, since we're covering 3 different topics, that opportunity for comment and question as we move forward, instead of just presenting and leaving them till later. So we'll start with the draft statewide wildfire hazard map. As you may be aware, in 2022, an initial wildfire risk map was issued by the state, as developed by the Oregon Department of Forestry and Oregon State University. That was initially issued for comment and received considerable comment from the community and stakeholders. And based on those comments, the state rescinded that initial map, went back to the drawing board, so to speak, and also the legislature updated the procedures and the methodology for the mapping. Originally a wildfire risk map that had 5 categories. The map now is a wildfire hazard map that incorporates 3 categories: low, moderate, and high risk, as it relates to wildfire hazards. That draft map was issued in the middle of July, and opportunity for comment since then, and ending on August 18th. So here's an opportunity to really evaluate the status of the map and any questions, comments from the council on the mapping, and any direction that you may have in wanting to provide formal comments on the draft maps. With respect to this item. I'm joined here by Kevin Moriarty, the Chutes County Forester, who has been involved in the process at the county level in providing kind of initial comments and the evaluation of the maps and is aware of the mapping procedures and the bit of the methodology. So what I have up on the screen is the draft wildfire hazard map for Sisters, and do have the opportunity to pan around the community if you have any specific areas you want to take a look at or comment on. So I think I'll pause there and pass it to Kevin to give a little bit more background on the process, county's involvement, the methodology, and other themes that he wanted to raise. So.
Yeah, good afternoon, Kevin Moriarty, County Forester. I can go into a little bit of the methodology with, and some of the changes that have occurred since the risk map and the current draft hazard map. So, one of the major changes was that it was changed from 5 categories to 3, and now we have the high, moderate, and low. One other thing to note is that originally when each pixel or 30-meter cell, which is what you would what is how they determined it, was they were using metrics of burn probability, fire intensity, and susceptibility. And so the fire intensity is essentially flame lengths. Your burn probability is how likely is a fire to occur, and that's based off past history that has happened, over the course of time. And then susceptibility was the proximity and density of structures. So the major change between the risk map and the hazard map is they removed the susceptibility, which is the proximity, density, and structures, and they're only using fire intensity and burn probability to determine the map. So essentially that was modeled. It's using data called Landfire, which is a data set that uses fuel models, and it determines those fuel models based on the existing vegetation. So, you have timber models, you have brush models, you have grass models. Generally in this area, the models, when I look at Landfire, the fuel models that you will see, especially on the western and the southwestern side, are primarily timber models, and the models that you will see on the northeastern side are primarily grass and shrub models. And so that gives you a basic understanding how some of the map looks the way it does. So after they ran the models, they basically averaged each tax lot or each pixel on what the fire behavior was. And so generally the timber models, the ones that they used are low intensity timber models and would not produce a high intensity fire. And that is kind of what you're seeing the result of a moderate hazard on your west side of the map.
Yeah, speaking of that, can you just really quick explain the 2 colors so everybody knows what you're talking about?
Yeah, so on the orange you have there is high hazard, and the purple is moderate hazard, and there is like I think a teal color. You might have a couple pixels in there that is low hazard. And so that is essentially how things have been developed. Is some of the influence that occurred with that is really has to do with the fuel treatments in around Sisters area. So a lot of the Forest Service treatments were incorporated when determining essentially the level of hazard for each of the pixels, and that might also give an approximation of why you're seeing more of a moderate classification on the southeast side and a high hazard on the northeast side, because those were they probably use more grass shrub models on the northeast side and timber models on the southeast side. Now, intuitively, that seems a little switched, but when you do look at the modeling, grass and shrub models can produce pretty significant flame lengths, where low intensity, low understory timber models do not produce those flame lengths. The accuracy, is yet to be determined, but that's kind of the nuts and bolts of how that map was created. Some of the the next steps, as far as, what's to occur. You know, the county planning staff received, a letter to basically scrutinize the map and determine anomalies within the map, and we did so. We provided a memo to OSU and Oregon Department of Forestry staff on June 28th regarding some of the concerns that we had with the map, and we have received response to that at this point with the map. None of it really was incorporating our concerns, but just justification to why the map looks the way it does. And so that was, kind of the process with that. We have the comment period is ending the 18th of this month for public comment. The commissioners are drafting a letter right now to send for public comment. And I would also encourage the city to possibly do something as well. Some of the next steps besides that is after the public comment period, they will review all the comments, and then a final map will be available on October 1st is the scheduled process. And upon that time, there will be a 60-day appeal period where landowners can appeal if they disagree with the decision that they are in high classification within the WUI. And I can answer any questions at this time.
So Kevin, in talking with with your commission and what kind of letter they're crafting, I think that it might help to understand the consequence of the map. Like what does it do, right? What does it mean for a property owner if you're in a high versus moderate risk? And I think, council starts this discussion in this workshop about, do you want to submit some comments? What should the city focus our comments on? Maybe less so on the methodology, given the technical side of that. I mean, there might be some input that we might want to provide on that, but in terms of how the actual map gets applied, might be something we would want to have input on, given if we start scanning around the city, you might have thoughts on why one parcel looks to be moderate while one is high versus low.
Yeah.
So maybe that first question.
Yeah. So, the broad scale consequences, I guess, would, it's kind of an inequitable approach to trying to provide defensible space and home hardening codes across the county. So in areas, especially that, the county has worked on for some time, identified as priority areas, for defensible space and home hardening, the map, is in disagreement with those areas. So, that's one concern. And then also, areas that, we feel and others that are potentially under mapped, you aren't going to get those defensible space codes that you are looking for to try and get community-based fire adapted communities. I mean, this is a community-based process. You can't really have a fire adapted community if 50, 70, even 80% is adhering to a code and 20, 30% is not. I mean, you really have to have pretty good consensus for a fire adapted community to work. So I think, for the city of Sisters, that's really important. If only a portion of the city has to adhere to a code and a portion does not, it doesn't make for a fire adapted community. So that's probably the biggest consequence I could see.
Yeah, and to provide additional detail, as you may be aware, but just to clarify, so within the legislation, Senate Bill 762 and Senate Bills 80, the applicability of the associated building hardening and defensible space codes are triggered by being in the high hazard and the wildland urban interfaces. So if you're not in both of those categories, you're not subject to those overall building hardening and defensible space codes. So to Kevin's point, with the different mapping within the hazard mapping program, you're going to have different applicability of those standards, different protection measures, different level of requirements in various areas of town, and in some instances, lot by lot.
This is the time.
So I find it, they particularly based on what you shared Thank you. Based on what you just shared, Kevin, or should I call you Mr. Moriarty?
Oh, it's fine.
Okay. So, it just seems strange to me that town our size, would not have one level so that we could develop a code that suits equitably all neighborhoods. And, so I mean, I'm kind of leaning that we should make it all high risk so that we, as I was saying to the city manager earlier yesterday, you know, I've done risk assessment when I was with the Pacific Bell, and with risk assessment, you look at the greatest risk and then you plan for that. And rather than, you know, well, what could possibly happen that isn't as bad, you know, so I just find it strange that the state is breaking us up into these little pixels of lots where you get a one property that's moderate surrounded by a property, everything that's higher risk, and then another property that's low risk surrounded by moderate. It just doesn't make sense to me. So I don't know, does that make sense to you all? I mean, is that one of the complaints you're hearing?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, it's not a common sense approach, and Sisters is a really good example of that. You know, being a small community and essentially a wildfire would influence the entire community as far as risk. But the way the modeling was done, it's by pixel and by tax lot levels. So you know, whatever the output is for each tax lot, it was what that was assigned to that pixel. There wasn't really any further adjustments to the model other than that, other than what was entered as the original field type.
So would the state have a problem with a city deciding that they want all of their lots to be high risk?
I believe that you can adopt a code for a defensible space, that would be much more strict than what's, you know, presented in the hazard map. It's the building codes would be more the issue, but you would be able to adopt a code for the, you know, the urban growth boundary or city limits that, you know, sets certain standards. But that would only be for the defensible space.
And I believe within the rulemaking associated with this, there's, during that appeal period, there's opportunities for individual property owners or jurisdictions to appeal the mapping of their communities. So that may be one of those time periods where the city could take action on an appeal. You know, because here we have the map. I don't know how much influence at the draft map stage we could have to say, please change the map to all high risk without some justification, but perhaps during that appeals process.
Could we ask?
We certainly can ask, and that can be a part of the comments. One distinction too, as we share the map, and we have the hazard classifications, that's the color coded that we spoke to. I just want to highlight just the wildland urban interface, or the WUI, which as you're seeing in the darker gray is that WUI area. So that's, except for a small portion of the public works facilities, the entirety of the community is within that wildland urban interface. That's clear boundary or identification or mapping that has mapped the entire community under one classification. So that could be another strategy or suggestion, is if we're looking at a citywide application.
Councilor Letts.
And yeah, that was gonna be my question. I wanted to see that map, so thank you. Because another option, you know, that we could ask for is to basically abandon this map and only use the WUI map, because the WUI map is way more realistic and, you know, has kind of broader brush strokes. You know, the very hard and deadly lessons we learned in 2020 from all of our Labor Day fires was that, you know, these fires were driven by embers moving 1 to 2 miles ahead of the fire. That is kind of the norm now, and a lot of the fires we're seeing in the last 10 years. So to draw things lot by lot is not only ridiculous, but it's just laughing in the face of people Oregonians who lived and didn't live through that experience. If we don't learn this lesson now, we're idiots. So, my proposal would be to, um, ask the state to abandon using this map as the tool. And if they want to use a map as a guiding tool, then the WUI map is much more realistic. Because we can't write code for half a town. Can't write code that goes down one street and around and then based on a map that should evolve because vegetation grows, buildings are built and torn down and trees grow and are torn out and stuff like that. We as a legislative body can't even write code to this.
Common sense tells me that if half the town's high, the whole town is high. Because if your neighbor burns, you're likely gonna burn, especially within the city where the densities are what they are. And I have to believe, and this is no disrespect to anybody in the room, that there are going to be times when we're gonna look at this map and go, well, we know that's what it says, but here's what we have to do as a community to protect ourselves.
Mhm.
And I think that that's, whether the map's adopted or not, I think that's what we have to do as a city, right? I think our citizens want that. I think everybody wants to be as safe as we can. And I think that we have to decide for ourselves in many ways that map or no map, we have to do as much as we can. So we're not Paradise or recently Lapine or recently Redmond or recently Bend, right?
Right.
I want to hear more about the map in the sense of what the map does to individual landowners, because I'm really concerned that when you start pixelating down to that level, I want assurances that people aren't getting picked on as landowners because, we already know that there's issues with insurance and everybody says, yeah, the insurance companies, they only use their own information. I don't know if that's entirely true or, I'm not an insurance adjuster or anything like that. And I understand that it's just a large concern when something gets published like this. And so we might be looking at it from two angles. One is individual landowners, which is one thing, and then looking at it as a community differently. And I think that's okay. If we're here to lead a community and get them in a place where we're all a little safer, that's good. Anyway, I'm sorry, I don't have a question.
Yeah, the
That was a
council's
comment.
previous position on this, when we had the workshop several months ago, was to adopt R 327, which is the model rules or the ordinance that requires building hardening standards, right? That make a new structure more fire resilient. What the state is now saying is that there is still a pathway for local jurisdictions to adopt that, but when the new map comes out and is fully implemented, that the building hardening standards would only apply, regardless of what local jurisdictions do, but only apply in the high hazard and in the WUI. And so even like the city of Ashland and Medford, that are the only two cities that we know of that adopted the R 327, are kind of in this predicament where they're going to be put in a place where they've already adopted the R 327, and now they're going to be kind of rolling backwards, even though they want to protect their entire community. So in terms of our comments and kind of coming back full circle now is, what could the legislation or could the state carve out a pathway for cities like ours, which we believe is at high risk, to go ahead and say, okay, maybe the whole city, according to your map, is not high risk, but we want a pathway, some way for us to adopt the R 327 building hardening standards, for every property within the WUI, for example. If they're not going to just use the WUI and they're going to stay with this map, then allow us to have some home rule authority to adopt our own, rules based off their own, model codes. It's just one way we can approach it as a way for continuing local jurisdictions to do our own adoption process, based off some criteria, or again, based off the WUI map and not the risk categories.
Well, I do like that WUI map idea that Councilor Letts brought forward.
I'm guessing the county is probably going to have a similar some similar bullet points about that too.
No, not necessarily for our 327. You know, we were more just concerned with the undermapping for the county as a whole, which was you know, essentially, but we did, you know, suggest that the WUI map that was created would be a much more useful tool to determine, you know, where to implement these building and defensible space standards. And so that was integrated into the.
Mhm.
And the WUI map stands for?
Wildland urban interface.
We have that map?
Yes, that was, Jennifer asked for it to go up and they showed, yeah, that one, yeah. So we're completely covered as, we're wooed.
Yes, Kevin pointed out, one of the, the big mistakes of this next revision was that they removed structures basically as a fuel model. Which is an interesting fantasy world to live in, that we don't live in structures, but they are a very influential fuel type. So, I mean, this is, I'll read it verbatim for you. This is from the state. It says what homeowners need to know. It says if you're in the high hazard zone and in the wildland urban interface, no action is required at this time. Building code standards do not apply retroactively. They only apply to existing home. If you're replacing a covered item, the effective date of the new code requirements will be based on when the wildfire hazard map is available. You are not required to change materials for partial repairs of your roof or siding. If you are not in the higher hazard zone and or are outside of the wildland urban interface, nothing is required related to home hardening, even after the effective date of the new code. If you want to make your home more fire resistant, view this link to learn more about the things you can do on your own. So this terrifies me because it's just giving people, you look at the map and they're like, oh, I'm in moderate, I'm in low. I have no responsibility. I have no drive. I have no, you know, fire under my butt, no pun intended. And it gets it's a false sense of security, and that's incredibly dangerous to me. You know, so I think that, you know, this map is not only kind of inaccurate, but it will set us backwards, and we do not need to be sliding backwards. You know, you know, so that's why I'm trying to just find you know, I don't like to point out problems without bringing a solution. And so it kind of just, all right, well, this WUI map's pretty good. So let's just use that. You know, here's a simple solution that gives us as a municipality way more control. But, you know, Kevin and I were in a meeting on Monday with Senator Golden out of Ashland because he was working on some related legislation to wildfire. And it was, you know, Phil Chang was in the room, fire chiefs from Lapine, Redmond Sisters, and then there was 4 insurance agents in the room, and 3 of them from Lapine. You know, similar, you know, risk in regards to being a smaller community, a lot of wildland around it, a lot of wild land within the community. And I mean, the horror stories they were telling about insurance were absolutely terrifying. And we're seeing that here. You know, there was an agent from Sisters as well participating, you know, and she was echoing, but what they're seeing in Lapine is terrifying because it's getting to the point they're getting their coverage pulled. I mean, they're trying to contact the insurance companies that they work for and are getting nowhere. They're not telling them anything. They're like, you know, well, it's proprietary. Well, where are you getting this data? Well, I can't tell you that. You know, well, what can we do to, you know, and sometimes they'll be, oh, well, your mitigations are cut every tree down within 30 feet of your house, or, you know, things that aren't even really scientifically based, you know. And so people are now they're seeing people that cannot get insurance no matter what. And they're getting foreclosed on because if you have a mortgage and you don't have insurance, the bank's calling their notes. And so then these people are one insurance payment away from being homeless.
Wow.
And that's 100% not what we want. And, you know, they're kind of, you know, there's, you know, Lapine's a different community than the Sisters, but we have a lot of similarities. And, it was just terrifying to hear their stories. And, you know, I think realtors will tell you the same thing. I mean, I know, talked to some realtors and Sisters as well, and they can't close on some properties because you're not allowed to get, you know, they can't get insurance on the property, or the, you know, or the insurance is $10,000 to $20,000 or a year. And, you know, you have an insurance industry that is just not stepping up to the plate. I did talk to, you know, Senator Golden and some of the insurance agents to talk about that Oregon has a FAIR plan, which is kind of your last resort, which of course, being government is very bureaucratic and hard to work with, and the insurance agents will do it if they have to, but they hate working with the program because it's really difficult to work with. So we kind of discussed a little bit in the room, like that might be the best opportunity for the state of Oregon to kind of try to retool that program. I mean, California has a similar program that's a little more robust because of their situation. You know, going up against, you know, multiple corporations and trying to get them to turn their ship, I mean, needs to happen and will have to happen, because they can't cut everybody's insurance, because then they're not getting money to run their companies. You know, there's going to be a breaking point financially for them somewhere. But, you know, I have, you know, my insurance company is willing to pay for, you know, private firefighters to come to my house if there's a fire in the area to prep my house. And it's like, well, why don't you just pay them to do that today before the fire comes? You know, if you have the money to pay for that and the ability to do that, why aren't they showing up today? Why aren't they showing up in February when it's cold and wet? And you can greatly reduce, you know, the company's losses and, you know, personal losses. So preventative.
Yeah.
None of it makes sense, you know, so it's kind of trying to figure out what can we do here in our tiny town with our small staff and our team here. You know, what can we leverage the most to make sure that we have the most ability to help our community.
Let me time hawk this a little bit, because is this the first of three?
Yeah, the bulk of the presentation and comments were related to the map,
Okay.
but do want to afford some time for building hardening and kind of next steps on that, just to know what that process may look like, and any updated direction from the council. Defensible space, that's all systems go. We're going to work on that.
What do you need to know about the map and our response to that?
Well, I think it sounds like we do want to provide comments.
Yes.
We have some issues with it. You know, and how we're happy to draft that letter. It's, again, we only have 4 days to do it. So,
Yeah, we need an alternative option.
yeah, and whether it's keep it simple, you know, we have issue with some of the methodology, with the way the City of Sisters is mapped in particular, but also there's a simpler path to assessing risk, and the City of Sisters would welcome, you know, being able to apply
And
building
some of the
hardening.
flexibility that we need as a city that is different than others, some other cities, that we want to be able to have some control over our own community
Mhm.
Be able to
Choices.
protect it. Yeah.
choices.
Yeah, I think the council got a letter or some public comment that had some good language in it that we can borrow from.
Okay. Fair enough. I mean, it's a tough issue. You know, I'm sure you've been hearing it, not just from us, right? So.
Yeah. I think the next question on the building hardening, I think, would be good to get some direction on, because we, you know, as I stated previously, we're kind of working towards that. Then we got the news that, well, wait, you could do it, but you're just going to have to rescind it because the map's going to override. I think the timing on how it's going to take this, how long it's going to take the state to implement that gives us sort of what, a 10-month sort of period until we think the building hardening is going to be kind of put in place. I'm kind of unclear on when the map adoption versus when the building hardening standards would be effective.
We all are. My name's
Okay.
Krista Appleby, Assistant Building Official. BCD, which is Building Codes Divisions, the state organization that oversees the building codes, will not be doing rulemaking until the fire hazard maps are final. So they kind of
Mhm.
are waiting to hear what ODF does as far as that timeline. Rulemaking takes about 49 days at a minimum. Usually it's a little longer because there's some public input, some back and forth. I did receive notice this morning that if all the stars aligned, everything went as currently marching along, that the fire hardening standards for those dual classified properties would be mandatory mid-2025. But there's a lot of moving parts.
What would be, so, yeah, anticipating questions, theoretically, what would be the soonest if, say, we proceeded as a city to adopt the R327, regardless of what the state is going to do, but in the interim between now and mid-2025, would be the soonest that we could enact that and implement, have your department be able to implement and administer that code?
That's a very good question. There is a very set process and I don't know the timeline for that. I'm sorry. I can get back to you.
There's still, there's a period of time that.
Yeah, because you have to have a public hearing, you have to
Yeah.
go through appeal process.
Yeah.
I do,
We have some public outreach probably to do ourselves,
would.
right?
We would definitely, because we have developments in progress, right? So there would be, need to be a lot of communication, so I'm just posing that as a question that, there is the option of proceeding, we may get, we may want to put this in place now to capture those properties. There comes with the consequence of public communication and developers being a little like, what are you doing? Versus waiting for the state to play it through.
Unlike the letter, we don't have a deadline in 5 days on
Right.
that part of it, right?
Yeah.
may I just toss something out there, if you don't mind?
Sure.
I just want to make it clear whether you adopt something soonish or you wait for the maps. That doesn't mean your community is instantaneously protected, right?
Right.
There's existing buildings. We don't go and
Oh.
tell people to take stuff off and put stuff on. So that these fire hardening rules will only be applicable to newly constructed dwellings, newly constructed accessory structures, additions to existing structures or additions to existing accessory structures. Or if someone were to say, hey, I'm going to re-roof my house, then that roof has to comply with the fire hardening standards. It does not apply to commercial structures or stores. It does not apply to most of your apartments because those come under the commercial code. I just want to make that clear where it will apply and where it doesn't.
Doesn't apply to apartments
Correct.
because they're considered commercial.
Correct. The residential code, Oregon Structural Residential Code is only 1 and 2 family dwellings.
And when you say additions, is significant additions of 25 or 50%, or what's the language on that?
At the moment, the language is just additions.
Okay.
So that could be 200 square feet and just that portion has to be fire hardened, the rest of your house is not. That could be a 3,000 square foot addition and just that addition has to be fire hardened.
Okay.
The rest of your house is not.
And not to put you on this, oh, go ahead.
Okay.
I was just gonna say, the one upside about like apartments and commercial buildings, usually they do have higher fire standards already, code standards, they have to be sprinklered and,
There's
things like that.
separations.
Yeah, so it's still not great, but not horrible.
We had talked about building hardening in a previous work session, kind of explaining what that is. And I was going to say, not to put you on the spot, but, the difference to, for what of what the current building code requires versus what the building hardening standards are. Like, that differential between a building built today under the existing building code versus a building that would be under the R327. I know the costs aren't that big of a deal, but what are the things that stand out?
As far as what would need to be,
Yeah, the structure, the roofing, the ventilation, are there things that are currently not happening today in the city? Or is it really kind of minor?
sure, you'll actually be surprised. There's quite a bit that is already done. Some of the materials that we side our homes and roofs with are already meeting that requirement. The hardy cementitious siding, the metal roofs, the comp roofs, shingle roofs. Double pane windows. Those are all requirements in this fire hardening that we already do for the most part. Some things that will be new to get used to are where can those attic vents be? And if they aren't above a certain dimension, above the grade or a surface below, what are the options? There are some specialized attic vents that you can place in those locations with building official approval that upon heat close up so the embers can't get into your attic and cause an issue. Or you just design to have a non-vented roof. I mean, there's choices. And some of them have been around a while. I suspect you're aware of those.
A little bit, underside of soffits,
Right.
you know,
might
there's some,
want to not have the exposed rafters anymore, depending on where you place that roof line.
size of mesh in vents, obviously.
Yep, that gets tighter.
I think some people are already switching to some of that stuff though. And because it's really not that more expensive when you're first putting it in. It's, a lot of the expense is retro. That you're digging into something that's already built, and that's where a lot of the high cost comes from.
Yeah, and I wanted to acknowledge that many developers or individual home builder or of a development are choosing to take that route and utilize these higher building standards from a quality of product or resiliency of their development altogether. So some are already adopting these code standards and other Firewise community requirements. So it's many of these standards have been adopted here locally already.
So there's nothing to get hysterical about.
Well, you can get hysterical if you want, honey.
Just acknowledging the impact of the code update on those, on new construction of those modifications, and the limited building inventory that, or buildable lands that we have available. And I think going back to our previous direction on adopting these standards was at a time when the mapping was not the timeline for the mapping wasn't available. And so it was indefinite. So it was an opportunity to take action here, you know, locally and during that time period. Now we have a backstop of a more realistic timeline. So we need to be thinking about what our local process of adoption, then timelines to roll out the implementation through the building division, and then what that opportunity and how many building permits will be applied for during that window of time.
In our proposed, or in the 327 code, there's nothing retroactive for, you know, so we have quite a few very old homes and, you know, tiny and definitely not hardened in any way.
She's calling me out.
So, what I'm wondering is, wouldn't we as a city want to figure out a way to help those people harden their homes? I'm sure there's funding and stuff like that. I mean, is there some kind of program that's happening for that we know about?
It's a great point. Like we've said, there's nothing that requires folks to unless they're replacing their roof or something like that, and they have to go to a higher rating. I was going to pivot to, you know, one thing that we do have more control over is the defensible spaces.
Yeah.
You know, and that's equally, if not more important, to create, you know, those spaces, the kind of the barriers in between properties, and you know, reducing fuel load and things like that. There's, you know, grant funding. I think we've talked in the past about urban renewal funding for our commercial properties, doing some building hardening. But as you heard, some of those things are kind of technical, and without a remodel or a major addition, it's going to be hard to kind of require or even entice property owners to replace their siding or change out their ventilation or something like that. Then it's going to be pretty costly.
Well, being mindful of the time,
Yes, thank you.
looking for any direction, or we could certainly come back, you know, in a subsequent meeting to talk more about the process of adopting our 327 here locally. So we're not on that same time constraint as we are with any comments on the mapping. But acknowledging that the way the building code is written is that we cannot go above and beyond what the building code requirements are. And so it's prescriptive and applied statewide for uniformity. I say that because so we're limited to how the legislation's written, that you're in the high hazard and the WUI. That differs from the defensible space standards that will be implemented through this legislation that the State Fire Marshal is developing, those defensible space standards. We aren't limited by that. So we can go above and beyond, and we've already discussed that, and the direction was to pursue adoption of some more robust standards. And so we're going to kick off that process here in this fall to develop those standards and come back before you for adoption either later this year on aggressive timeline or first part of next.
Okay.
Well, that shows the weakness of the map, right? I mean, it doesn't give us the flexibility in hardening that it does in defensible space.
But once again, we're limited to new construction for the defensible space standards.
No,
Yeah, we have more flexibility there. First, we'll start with those new developments where we can start with that kind of initial development. There will be opportunities to explore vegetation management, much like our weed abatement standards that we have. We can look at employing those similar strategies to maintenance of vegetation ongoing. Because that's a critical part of any defensible space is establishing it and then maintaining it.
so comment on the map. We'll have to figure out what that is. The home hardening stuff, 327, we could probably slow down, pump the brakes, or pause for
I'd rather be aggressive. I want to be aggressive because
aggressive.
we have another fire season after this one coming. We should,
there's no such thing as a fire season anymore, really. I mean,
yeah,
you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
not all year round, but it's almost. all year round.
almost, yeah.
So,
We kind of
Um,
dragged out the process because we were kind of waiting for this process to finish, and be patient. And I think we've been patient long enough, and
Mhm.
okay,
that's my thought.
I agree.
so that's home hardening. I guess we're gonna keep moving forward. I
Even
mean,
if we decided to move forward, we would probably interject about the same time next, assuming all the stars align. If it does happen by mid next year, we probably couldn't get it.
Well, we might get
Much
more
before that.
information in the interim, right, over the next
Yeah.
couple months as we
We can do a
proceed on
duel and it
adopting.
might end up,
Yeah, maybe they'll hear our comments and say, sure, you could do that, and we won't rescind and,
right.
I wouldn't want us to get in a position where we adopt something and we start implementing it, and then 2 months later, we have to pull back, and so
Yeah.
we're just yo-yoing builders.
So keep going to get ready to make
Right.
the final decision, I guess.
we're ready to go.
And then definitely on defensible space, I think we're all, just keep going.
Yep, that's next step.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sound good?
Okay, so did we say that we're going to do the aggressive or the slow approach? I wanna-
Well, I mean, I
Clear.
think they're gonna keep moving forward, which.
We'll keep moving, we can bring, get more information on what the timing is and what the
Okay.
requirements are, the public hearings and noticing, how to.
Somewhat
inform-
parallel.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll be ahead of them. Maybe we won't. Maybe it'll be about the same, but at least we'll be ready.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for coming. We
Yeah.
appreciate it very much.
Especially when you don't have that good of news. to bring. It's not like as if we were going, oh, yay. Oh, it's,
It's not you, it's the map.
yeah.
We appreciate it.
I'm just.
All right, urban growth boundary amendment update. Sorry, we got into your time a little bit. Matt, you're gonna have to keep it brief.
I can talk fast, when I
That'll
need
be
to.
the first
Really,
time that would happen.
Andrew,
That'd be new, I understand, but no, I'm just kidding.
I'll just kick it off real quick and then we'll get going here. But Scott Woodford here, just to give you guys an update on the UGB amendment process, to keep you as the council apprised of what we've been doing. The idea is to keep you guys updated, and so that once we get down to the end, you guys have had the benefit of all the conversation and are up to speed. So we've been working with the steering committee. We've had a couple meetings with them already. We've had a couple meetings with the planning commission, and this is the second meeting with the council. The idea is to kind of start with the steering committee, go to the planning commission, and then have the council have the benefit of all the comments and the conversation. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the two topics that we've run by the steering committee, which is the land needs report and followed by the study area, draft study area. We feel that you guys have probably are pretty well briefed on the land needs report, so we're going to kind of gloss over that a little bit more. Whereas with the steering committee, we spent a little more time with that to make sure that they were aware and understood what the basis of this process is. And then we'll just go spend a little more time on the study area map, kind of tell you a little bit about what the state requirements are and how to create that map, some of the considerations, how we prioritize the land in the study area in terms of which lands would be the first ones to consider for expansion, constraints that we can remove, things of that nature. And then we'll give you a little summary of what the steering committee and the planning commission, their input into that. Just briefly, before we get started, just we are gearing up for getting out of the community. We're doing our community conversations. We're going to start them up in September and October. We've asked and recruited some of the steering committee members to help us out with that, to extend our reach with groups in the community that they may be already affiliated with or aware of, and get out there and kind of explain this process to those community members and get input. And so we're putting the materials together to have them be successful out there with that, and we'll get that going here soon. And then we started doing some tabling out in the community. We did Emmy Shoup and I did the farmers market a couple of weeks ago. Had a table set up with some maps, and it's crazy how interested people are when you put maps up. They kind of flock to them. And we put chairs out so that we could sit down, but I don't think I ever had a chance to sit down because I think we figured we had about 65 to 70 people came through and were asking about it, mostly locals. So it was a great opportunity. And we're going to do a variety of more of those tabling exercises at various spots around the community during the year, which we find to be very effective. So got Andrew Parrish and Matt Hasty from MIG on board with this. I believe both of them. I can't see you guys behind me, but I think I heard Matt. So I'm going to turn it over to them, and they're going to lead you through a presentation. The idea is to go through this fairly efficiently, but to leave opportunity for you guys to ask questions and provide some comments for us. So Andrew or Matt, I'm not sure which one, but pass it on to you guys.
Yeah, and I think I'm really just going to kind of cover the first slide, and then Andrew's going to talk about really a lot of the technical information, kind of the two things that are on the slide, and then I will finish up with a little bit of information about what we heard from the steering committee and the planning commission, and just some observations about specific kind of sub areas within the larger planning area or within the larger study area. So it's kind of how we'll do it. And I think maybe what we'll do is we'll get through the first part of the presentation, then stop and just see if you have any questions for Andrew about what he's talked about, and then go through the second part and then just see if you have any additional comments, things to add, or questions for us about the observations about the sub areas. So that's what I would suggest, if that sounds okay to y'all. And just thanks for having us on the screen tonight. So maybe next slide, Andrew. Andrew's driving the presentation tonight. So just kind of a reminder of where we are in the process. Kicked off the project back in March and April, updated the land needs analysis. And again, we'll talk fairly briefly about that tonight. And then identified the study area for the UGB expansion evaluation. And so that's kind of the main thing we'll talk about this evening. And then our next step is to create and evaluate specific alternative areas within that larger study area. And we've started to kind of get a sense of, where we might be headed in that direction. But that's what we'll be working on and really having more community engagement in over the next few months. So, and then after that, kind of the succeeding steps in the process, identifying a preferred alternative and going through an adoption process and developing findings that support the adoption. And then kind of the last part of the process is to start doing some planning for, assuming, we're successful up to that point, start doing some planning for the future growth areas there. So next one, and I will turn it over to Andrew and he'll talk to you for a while.
All right, thank you, Matt. As Scott mentioned, we're just going to talk kind of briefly about the kind of land need side of things. But just as a reminder, all our land need projections are basically they're based on the Portland State University's Population Research Center forecasts that they do for every county and every kind of urban growth boundary within every county in the state of Oregon. The city of Sisters is projected to see a fair amount of growth and to kind of make up an increasing share of population county in Deschutes County. I mean, the whole county is experiencing a lot of growth, and Sisters is seeing a fair amount of that. Is kind of what this comes down to. We are looking at a target date of 2043 for the planning horizon for this urban growth boundary expansion. And if you look out to that date, kind of in terms of percentage, the city of Sisters is really growing at a faster rate than other communities in Deschutes County, even though it's starting at a fairly small baseline. We've done an inventory of land supply on the residential side and on the employment side. And these are maps that you can find on the city's website, and the story map that we put together that lets you kind of look at this data interactively online. But basically, there isn't a lot of vacant land for residential uses left in the city. The areas in this map that are green are the ones that were vacant as of 2023, which is when our kind of our data starts here. The red parcels are locations where recent development activity it has happened, and so you're seeing some of these larger vacant parcels build out as we speak, and that just kind of speaks to the need for residential land. On the employment side as well, there are some kind of industrial parcels that are available in the city. There's a few commercial parcels, some mixed use kind of downtown parcels that are available, but those are also being developed currently. And as we put our forecast together, we see a demand for both residential and employment land. We've also had discussions with the school district for the likely need of a new elementary school that is coming in at about 15 acres. The city recently adopted a park standard that leads to a need of about 19 new acres for parkland. That is part of this overall UGB expansion for residential employment and other kind of land that cities need in Oregon. So the most recent work that we've done and what we've taken to the steering committee and the planning commission most recently is talking about the study area. So the state requires that cities look at all land within a half mile of the existing urban growth boundary, and what's called exception land within half a mile and contiguous out to 1 mile of the existing urban growth boundary. Exception land means that it's not really rural resource land. It's residential subdivisions typically, and there's a couple of other things that fall in that category. And then in creating the study area, cities are allowed to exclude specific properties from that study area. But just given the size and nature of the study area in Sisters, we're not recommending any exclusions at this point. Things will get kind of kicked off the table in later steps. But here's a map showing land outside the urban growth boundary of the city of Sisters. So we have a half-mile line and a 1 mile line. You'll see that a lot of the land is zoned EFU or Forest 1 or Forest 2. And then the yellow land here is rural residential RR10 land. And that's the exception land, basically, is what we're talking about. So just to zoom in real quick on kind of the western side of the city, we're required to look at land that is within half a mile if it's rural residential, and then take everything contiguous to that out to 1 mile. But the Tollgate and Crossroads subdivisions are not within that half-mile boundary. So that's why they're not included in later slides. This is just kind of a zoom in there. They're basically a quarter section away from the urban growth boundary currently and don't fall into that category. So this is the map of contiguous rural residential land out in the county in yellow here. The red hatched areas are constraints, basically. So those are floodplains, steep slopes, and the airport zone. But this is showing basically what's the higher priority land that we're going to need to be looking at for future urbanization. We've got some more information about that. Also in this area are a couple of conservation easements. Mainly the school district owns a fair amount of property adjacent to the urban growth boundary. It has a conservation easement on it, and it's not really developable. In addition to the zoning that it has this additional easement as well that we've talked to the school district about. There's a fair amount of federal land ownership as well. So we have this information that we're looking at. This is Forest Service land and generally not considered to be developable. But if we put all the rules together and we don't do that kind of optional exclusion step, this is what the study area is looking like in this kind of bright blue line here. And we're talking about, about 4,000 acres of land in total. The land that's yellow, just the exception area land, that's about 1,940 acres. And we're really looking for somewhere in the vicinity of 250 acres. So we've got a lot of land in this kind of rural residential category that we're required to look at first. And that's kind of a lot larger than the 250 acre needs. So it seems like that's going to be where our initial expansion alternatives are really going to focus. So this map, it lists things by priority. So priority 1, now it's in the green, is exception land. Priority 2 doesn't apply for the City of Sisters. Priority 3 is resource land that is not high quality farmland. So that is the yellow on this map. So that's the forest land. And then priority 4 is high quality farmland. So we've mapped the exclusive farm use zoned land, the EFU zone in the study area here. And in the bottom right, we have just a square that says 250 acres. That just gives you kind of a visual idea of how much land that is, about 250 acres. That will change depending on the assumptions we make for some of these residential subdivisions out in the priority 1 land, but so you might need to actually expand the urban growth boundary more than 250 acres to achieve that much growth based on our assumptions. But it's just to give you kind of a sense of the overall need that we're talking about. So at this point, I'm going to pause and I guess ask if there's any questions about either the forecasted need overall or the way that we've drawn this study area boundary. And then we're going to go into more detail about different sub areas in the boundary in a moment with Matt.
I wanted to make one comment and just kind of point out for everybody that we're not just talking about housing. There is 53 acres, I think, of need for employment lands. So we're not talking about subdivision sprawl or any one thing. Obviously, there's 19 acres for parks, 15 for schools, 53 for employment lands, which leaves anywhere from 100 to 140 or so, depending on the math, of actual housing. So it's not just housing; it's all the needs that we have that the city will need, and obviously a lot of that will be used for right-of-ways, roads, infrastructure as well. So it's not just packed housing. So let's not get stuck on that. All right, go ahead. Thanks.
All right, so I'm going to just briefly talk about some of these specific areas. As Andrew said, we're really going to be focusing kind of the bulk of our, I guess, analytical effort on the area to the northeast of the existing city limits. But we did want to, at a high level, just sort of describe the entire study area in a little bit more detail. And to do that, we kind of broke it up into these sub areas. We didn't draw real hard lines to delineate these sub areas, but they do have some different characteristics. So we're just going to take a quick walk through them and talk about kind of our observations and also some of what we heard from the steering committee and planning commission. So the sub area 1, which we called UGB South, and hopefully you're okay with our names. We can always rename them if people have other ideas. But that's one of the areas with lower priority land because it's zoned for forest use, F1. It's an area where you've got a lot of great trails, hiking and mountain biking trails, and you've got some city-owned land down there. That's where the city's sewage treatment plant is, and some additional land that's kind of set aside for other public facilities. So that's sort of the characteristics of that area. And I'm just going to kind of walk through these, and if you do have comments on any of them, feel free to just interrupt me. And then we'll also pause after we've walked through these real quickly and just see if there are other comments or questions. So number 2, we called Sisters View South. This is also in sort of one of those lower priorities in terms of we need to look at the higher priorities lands first and kind of exhaust that before we get down here. And here we've got land that's zoned for farm use, so exclusive farm use. It is an area that's close to schools and other parts of the city. There's also a portion of the land in this area owned by a tribal member. That was one of the things noted during the steering committee meeting for us. Number 3, Reed Ranch area. Again, primarily land zone for forest use. It's really essentially one large parcel, forest parcel in this area. And it's primarily, in forest. That's what's there is forest and Forest Service roads. So that's what's down there. Number 4, also again zoned for some combination of forest use, F1 and F2. I will note that while a lot of this area is either owned and managed by the Forest Service, or in one case by the owned by the school district, there's also a property that's privately owned. It's essentially kind of north of Kinsey Meadows Village. It's about 60 acres. And I think, the owner's long-term plans for that were to kind of extend that development, but it is currently zoned for F2. So it does put it in that lower priority, even though it has some kind of good attributes in terms of thinking about its future in the city, possibly because it's close to schools and it's close to existing residential development. And it's got road access. So just want to note that one. And then now we kind of get into the rural residential area to the northeast. We kind of split this up into 3 different sub areas. So first one is we call the Camp Polk vicinity. So this and 6 and 7 are all in that high priority land category because they're all rural residential, so they're all exception areas. Pretty heavy existing parcelization or subdivision already in this area, which is generally going to make development, kind of urban level development, a challenge. We had some questions in the steering committee meeting about whether or not there are CC&Rs, conditions, covenants, and restrictions, I think. I always forget the R, on these properties. And so that's something we need to get some more information about and understand how that might affect the ability to create additional development in this area in the future. The airport, there's some areas sort of adjacent to the airport in this area, and we have heard some interest from the airport in kind of additional housing hangar homes. So I'm sure you're all familiar with those homes where like the garage is essentially a hangar for an airplane. And so, interest there on that. There is, a street wet network and septic systems in this area. So, but it's not served by, urban level infrastructure. Number 6, Barclay vicinity. We, some of the comments during our last steering committee meeting were that this could be a fairly attractive or efficient area in terms of future development. In the 2002 UGB expansion process, this one was rated pretty highly in terms of potential for future growth. It's got a number of pretty large parcels with a fairly small number of homes on them. So less of an issue in terms of the parcelization that I talked about earlier. There are sewer lines and a pump station in close proximity to this area. There are some flooding area issues associated with some of the area adjacent to the airport that have been noted. But this is also, close to, again, the existing city limits and not far from downtown and jobs and businesses in the city. So this one, I will just say, seems to be maybe relatively more promising than some of the other ones. And then the last one we called the Wild Horse vicinity. Some of the comments that we heard and discussion we had with the steering committee, folks asked about potential fire risk. I did not listen to your whole presentation on the earlier item, but some of it, looked like this, and really most of the city, but especially kind of to the east, ended up in the fire hazard zone. But folks asked about that. They asked about the fire district's ability to, fight fires in this area. And part of what we heard was, that could be an issue, but, and the things that would need to be done to address it would be to make sure that there is water service at fire suppression levels, that there's access to get fire equipment out here, and that people have good insurance related to fire suppression or fire damage. And I would also expect, fire hardening issues as well. So we also heard some notes just that the area, the parcels near Highway 26, some limited access in terms of transportation other than from the state highway. At the same time, this is also relatively close, especially the lots that are sort of just east of the city limits are relatively close to downtown and other businesses. And so potentially some better potential from that standpoint. So that's sort of what we've done so far. And again, our next step is to look at these areas in more detail and start to map out some specific areas that we would evaluate as potential alternative expansion areas. And this larger kind of 5, 6, and 7 area is where we're pretty likely to start. But there might be a couple other spots where we say, if we sort of exhaust our options in this area, here's some other areas we could look at. So I will stop there and just see if y'all have any questions or anything to add, particularly the mayor, since he was at the steering committee meeting. But yeah, just anything else to add from anybody.
Unfortunately, I was out of town and wasn't there for the meeting. And
Oh, I thought you were. Sorry. Who was
Sorry?
there? Was somebody on the council there? I thought they were. I was actually there in person this time.
Right.
Well,
We brought up one thing in the meeting, and I thought it might be worth you all hearing it from Jordan. I had brought up the notion of, is there any importance in bringing in our city-owned lands that are outside our current UGB into the UGB? Like, are there any pluses or minuses? Do we need to be looking at that?
yeah. Yes. Thank you. Yeah. That was a good discussion. I don't think we came to any conclusions, but I think it was a really good question to ask us and for us to think about.
Yeah, I think the way we sort of answered is it works today, right? We're not proposing to do any more intensive development other than potentially doing like some recreational uses associated with the wetland concept for, we're planning to create more storage for effluent. And so we're talked about maybe having those conversations with the county to see the allowable uses under their current zoning, and if that concept for what we plan to do with our wastewater could work under that current zoning. If not, then maybe we do need to bring in lands, for public purposes. But previously, Paul and staff, we looked at with the UGB expansion not needing any more public land more land for public purposes.
And I guess the other thing I'd note, just in terms of a consideration, it's because those city-owned lands are generally devoted to or planned for those types of infrastructure uses is not going to get you a lot of capacity for the other types of land needs that we identified in terms of residential or commercial. But, you know, it's not to say we can look at it.
Sure, yeah, I think the question came from, I remember when we went to that UGB class or presentation, was it Newport or Lincoln City or something? They had done a, you know, a annexation because they only owned like half of their reservoir or
Right.
something, you know, so it was more of just that ability to have more control over piece of land. That's how I remember it. I
Right.
don't know if you remember it any different, but that's kind of what popped into my head.
Well, and basically, if we just got to know, is it better to bring it in, and do we have more control over it that way, or do we actually have less because it's brought in, you know? So I think we just have to make those determinations, right?
Yeah, especially given that, like I said, we have alternative plans for what that might look like in the future. We do have public facilities outside, well outside the UGB.
Of course.
Yeah, reservoirs, you know, pumps,
is-
all that.
We just got to make sure we're not closing the door when we don't need to close the door, or accidentally slamming the door shut and then needing land later. Even if it's, you know, 20 or 50 years, we want to keep ahead of things, much like the city did when they bought part of the Lazy Z Ranch to put that out there. So you're off.
The public land that we own that we're speaking of, you just mentioned Lazy Z. Is some of it in Indian Ford Meadow, that, you know, that wetlands that we have there? Do we?
Well,
own
it's all
some
in that UGB South or outside of that
Yeah.
area.
Oh,
All in
UGB
the
South, okay.
southeast.
Yeah, it's kind of right underneath that number one, and just a little above it. That's what the area we're talking about.
Yeah, toward Highway 20, yeah. Okay. So I'm curious because when we first were looking at some maps months ago, I don't know if I was meeting with city manager or someone else, but and talking about those 5, 6, and 7 areas, it was kind of disheartening to go that way because they're already populated. And I think the reason we're doing this is to increase our ability to, you know, have more single homes and multi-use land use areas. So I'm curious, are we going to be able to satisfy the need that we're talking about with 5, 6, and 7 or not?
We don't know for sure, but we think probably yes. Simply due to the number of acres out there and the number of acres that are identified as a need. And I will also say that while some of that area is, you know, like in general, it's populated, some of it's less populated than other areas. So that kind of remains to be seen. That's our next step, is to evaluate this in more detail. But when we just look at the sheer number of acres out there, and the number of acres that are identified as needed, our initial guess is that it's probably going to be hard to say we can't find 250 acres in that area that would satisfy the need. And so I'll stop there, but that's what I would generally say. But we will see to some degree. But it's the highest priority in terms of we have to sort of exhaust that area before we look at other areas.
Thank you.
Yep.
I think that's the most important point. It's the requirement of us to look at that first. I mean, that's how it's written for us.
And you go and do the parcel analysis, right? What's the suitability of that? Can you parcelize it so that it could be subdivided to create more urbanization? You know, so that analysis is yet to occur, but we have to first look at that. And there is enough acreage there to look at that first.
Yep, exactly.
Assuming the landowners won't resist having their 5 or 10 acre lots made smaller.
Well,
That's totally, it's their
That's part
property,
in
it's
it.
totally
Yeah,
up to them.
yeah, I know.
as far as the UGB itself, that's not, I mean, it's a thought, but it's not a requirement as far as whether they have desire or not.
Typically, the scenario is that landowners aren't the ones that come in and develop. It's usually they want to sell, and Joe developer comes in and assembles some properties, and they're the ones that come in and propose it. So it's not at that point, the property owner is kind of saying, I'm out of this, and as long as I get my money, I don't care, kind of thing. So it's the developer at that point. So the landowner, is kind of out of the equation at that point after they sell the property.
And I'll also note that again, this is not true for all of that area, but for some of that area, particularly under the number 6, kind of under where it says Barclay vicinity and kind of in that area, there are some landowners who are interested, who have fairly decent sized pieces of property and limited number of homes on them. So that's, I do think at least portions of that area are likely to rate better than others simply because of the average size of the property and the potential willingness of property owners and the proximity to the existing city
Yeah,
limits.
and let's not kid ourselves, even if they all come in. There are some properties that may start transitioning to coming in, annexed into the city fairly quickly. But for the most part, I mean, this is supposed to be a 20-year supply. It's not going to be overnight for sure.
Well, and
The Woodlands is a great example. It came into the UGB in 1979 and was not developed until it was rezoned in the late 2010s and, 2018, 2019. And then it's just now under construction. So it's taken them over 40 years.
yeah, just to add to your point there, it is a 20-year plan. The idea is that this all doesn't get developed within 1 year or even 5 years or 10 years. And that annexation has to occur incrementally, and it has to be contiguous to the existing boundary. So it's a kind of a incremental process that occurs. In other words, a parcel that's, on the edge, a half mile away, not contiguous to the existing boundaries, cannot come in and propose annexation because they're not contiguous to the existing boundary. So it's an incremental process. And I thought the steering committee did a good job of kind of honing in on some of these issues in terms of developability of these rural residential lots to the north. I always kind of use the example of you can look on the map and you can see Clear Pine. In order to do a Clear Pine size development, you'd probably up in that area to the north, you'd probably have a developer would probably have to assemble like 6 or 7 or 8 different properties and have property owners all willing to sell at the same time, which is a challenge. And the steering committee did a good job of kind of noting those challenges of how those rural residential properties to the north could urbanize, or the challenges and and the costs of each property, and whether that pencils out for a developer to go forward with the development on. So those are the things we're going to kind of start taking a closer look at the next phase.
Yeah, when we get dialed in on these next study areas, it'd be nice if the numbering system kind of went with the priority of the land possibly.
Yeah.
Because it's almost backwards. And I would have probably started up near the exemption lands with 1, 2, and 3. And
Yeah.
it just would have connected with my brain a little better.
Yeah, and I think probably what you're seeing here, like this is a pretty interim map.
Right.
I expect when we actually start
Yeah.
identifying more specific expansion areas, that's a really good point. We'll
Just
order
keep
them the right way,
I guess.
in a more intuitive way, let's say.
Thank you.
Yep.
What else do you have? We're getting kind of down to the last 5 minutes. Are you
We
pretty
don't
much
have-
there?
Yeah, we're pretty much there. I think we had maybe a slide just to talk briefly about next steps. We just wanted to see if you had any other questions, or just kind of make sure, hey, sounds like we're generally on the right track, or this is making sense to y'all. But otherwise, yeah, we were just going to cover next steps, which we've already started to talk about a little bit, which is, again, kind of next step really is to create and evaluate. This is sort of a 2-part thing. One, to evaluate the entire study area in a little more detail, just to describe it in more detail, and then to identify specific alternative expansion areas and evaluate those in detail. So that's what's going to happen over the next approximately 3 months. Really, hear what the steering committee and you all, but also the broader community have to say about all that. So that's what's happening over the next few months. Then we'll move into these processes of, again, creating a preferred alternative based on all that outreach and evaluation that we do. and then moving forward with those additional steps. Annexation and development's really longer term, as Scott said, kind of beyond this process. But we do expect to do some initial planning for new growth areas, at least to establish a framework, and likely to take at least one priority expansion area and do some kind of, I'll call it concept or conceptual planning for that area. So that's what's left kind of in this process. Well, people will go forward and
Yeah,
do what they
understood.
do.
The next 3 months is obviously going to be really interesting. Does anybody have any questions with Matt or for Matt or Andrew? I want to thank you guys. We're going to talk with Scott for a second. You put out a doodle poll for the next stakeholder meeting, I think. I haven't looked at it yet, but is that September?
It's-
We're proposing the October 3rd.
October, okay. October 30th, 3rd, okay. So that's about a little more than a month from now, which is great. Yeah, I had one more thing, but I don't remember what it is now. Oh, real quick. Did you summarize what the planning commission discussion was like? I didn't, can you,
They didn't really have much more to offer.
so it was just a listening session for them?
It
and
was
get them
pretty much a
updated?
listening session.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't recall
Okay.
any major issues coming out of the plan.
I mean, obviously, we have a record we can go look at if we
Yeah,
needed to.
it all made sense to them, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Okay.
think it's Art that's on the steering committee from the planning commission, right? So I think he kind of got this, voice echo some of the things that the steering committee had said. So it's always great, yeah, to have that. So,
All right. Well, I think that's good. We're going to keep going. I'll be at the next meeting.
all right, sorry to get mixed up about who was there.
Yeah. Well, you
Much for my poor.
added me out. No, I was in North Carolina for a family thing. I had to go, so wasn't fun, but we did it, right? So, all right.
Andrew plans to be there in person for the next one, and I'll be on the screen. So.
All right, we'll go for a coffee, Andrew, okay? All right. Barring anything else, we're gonna close this meeting. We're gonna start the city council meeting at 6:35.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, welcome everybody to the Wednesday, August 14th regular city council meeting. It is 6:37 p.m. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody. Roll call, Rebecca.
Mayor Preden,
President and accounted for.
Council President Blum,
Here.
Councillor Lutz.
Here.
Councillor Cobb.
Here.
All right, thank you. Just a quick reminder, cell phones, please turn them off. And people up here, cell phones away from the microphones. That's myself included. Next up is approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion?
Move approval of the agenda.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. All those favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Visitor communication.
Farrell Trace. Boris.
Just a quick reminder, we generally do 3 minutes or so. You could please keep it under that, and
Okay.
your name and address, please.
My name is Boris Tkach, and I live at 914 East Horseback Trail here in Sisters.
Thank you, Boris, for being here today.
Yeah,
We
thanks.
Appreciate you.
And comments I'd like to make are regarding the wildfire hazard map that we just heard about. And you saw that there was inconsistent mapping within Sisters, and we saw that 2 years ago when the first risk map came out. And so really, there hasn't been much change, if any, in the way the map looks. And my concern and a concern of a group of our neighbors in Saddlestone is that that map is not correct. And let me just say a little bit about myself. I retired U.S. Forest Service and been living here for about 5 years. But before that, I was in research and forest health monitoring with the Forest Service. We did a lot of mapping. We worked a lot with land fire. I know how these maps are developed. They're using satellite imagery, Landsat imagery, and apparently they're using pretty dated imagery. And if you look at some of the layers, data, I mean, Google Maps has more accurate maps than they do. If you go to Google Maps and pull up the satellite, Saddlestone is built out. If you go to the layers that the state used for the risk mapping, it's a grassland. So how can you equate those and map, whole development, a new development, as high risk? Now, I know that the risk mapping is going to affect, homeowners because of the possibility of ordinances for defensible space and site hardening. Of course, that's for new construction. But, what if I want to put a shed in my backyard? Okay, what if I need a new roof? Anyway, is that really the way we want to handle it? Now, I agreed with Councilor Cobb that, we should advocate to the state to have a consistent look at the city. They really should be looking at built environments and mapping those. What they're using are wildland data sources, not urban data sources. So if we're, considered an urban area, even though we're in the WUI, and I agree with that, we should be consistently mapped. The other thing that they're looking at is exempting irrigated agricultural land, but they're not exempting irrigated residential land. Does that make sense? I've got a sprinkler, that irrigates my property and the little lawn that I have, and the natural shrubs and so forth. And that certainly affects the fire potential. So that's what I would suggest. I would strongly urge you as a town council to make comments to the map. I intend to do that, as many of my neighbors have done, and as our HOA board is going to do as well. Because we're going to have significant consequences. And even though they say that, well, the insurance companies are not supposed to use this information, we heard that otherwise. So anyway, I'd urge you. And then lastly, as you're looking at your UGB expansion, that 6, 7, 8 area, that's all high risk. You just saw that in the map. And so, is that accurate? I don't know. But it's certainly going to affect how you're going to be able to build, affordable housing without being able to meet the codes for defensible space and site hardening. So that's a challenge. So those are some things I'd like you to consider. So thanks for your time.
Thanks for your comments. All right, we have other.
Joshua Smith.
Good evening, council. My name is Joshua Smith, resident of 523 North Fremont Street, also vice president of the Sisters Business Association, which is what I am on here speaking for today. We are an organization of businesses helping other businesses. Over the past few months, we've come to the realization. Normally, I try to be an optimist for all of us in our town. But we had some real serious, deep discussions on what we're all going through with the economy right now. As you all know, and you're paying higher prices for groceries and oil, as that affects everything. We're all, and this, I don't speak for every business in town, but the ones that we have spoken to are down approximately 20 between 20 and 60% comp to last year. So it's been a rough year for the small businesses here in town, which are limited. So we just want to make sure that the city council is aware of that. As you know, a couple of businesses have recently closed in town. And the outlook isn't great for a lot of the businesses that we have in our association. So that's something that I think should be talked about a little bit more going forward with the state of the economy, because our town is tourist centric. And with those tourists coming to town, I know we see a lot of car traffic, but the foot traffic hasn't been there this year, with people trying to spend money on the essentials just to get by. So that's all I really wanted to say. I apologize for being kind of a pessimist in the subject, but I think that it's important that it's brought up and in front of the city council to know, because we do thrive on that. And as a town, if these businesses close, our community doesn't have anywhere to shop. And that's where all of our dollars come from. So I think that needs to be looked at a little bit deeper. So what I have. Any questions?
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate you.
Pat Lesser.
Pat Lizer. I live at 69882 Meadowview Road, Sisters in Indian Ford. And anything more? No. Okay. I'm on the board of the Three Sisters Historical Society, and I'm a docent at the museum. And we are very concerned about the Conklin House, and we would love to have it continue, or at least be preserved. I know that in the 2003 city survey that was done, it's listed as a historical structure. And I know that the barn where the distillery is today follows that rural zoning. And I feel that we all feel that the present zoning should be maintained until when we don't know exactly what development will be there. We would like to see that protected. So thank you.
Thank you.
Charlie Stevens.
What comments are closed on that? So people can speak now on it, I assume, Garrett?
No, that's
Okay,
public comments, not for issues that appear later on the agenda.
okay. Sorry about that. It's later on the agenda, but there won't be a public comment period.
Yeah.
So we apologize, but that's,
Written record was held open until.
we held up, yeah. And when you gotta talk in the microphone too.
Sorry, yeah, the public hearing on the TA was closed at the meeting for oral testimony, but the written record was held open for another couple weeks to the end, I think close to the end of the month. And then tonight is the deliberations on that item.
Anyway, thank you for trying to comment. I guess I apologize for the legalities of that. Rebecca?
Zinnia.
Feel like I was just here 2 days ago with PC Council. My name is Zenya Kuzma. I live at 914 East Horseback Trail in Sisters. I stayed for the workshop on the urban growth boundary, and I've seen it twice, and they were focusing on the areas 5, 6, and 7. And at the same time, I heard it was a high-risk fire area, especially 6, even though urban growth boundary person said 7 was, and that it shouldn't be considered as much as 6. So I'm confused because that's contradictory information, that 6 would be high risk and 7 is high risk in somebody else's book. Anyway, it's high risk. I think you should put the brakes on the urban growth boundaries, because you had other people tell you you don't need 300 acres for urban growth boundary. Our population is stagnant. Actually, it's the only city that has stagnant growth. In 20 years, it won't be, that's true. But with this high-risk category, maybe we should think about not building out as much, because that will increase your urban interface, and that's where fires occur. Most fires occur in the urban interface. And if you increase it, you're not only impacting wildlife ecosystems and this great forest, but you're impacting the lives of many people who really appreciate Sisters. And I hate to quote that movie, but what if this is as good as it gets? So I want you to realize that there's contradictory information being given people on fire risk. There's contradictory information that was received about if they could do anything in a referendum, in a vote. There's a court case right now in court at North Plains. August 12th, it started. I would like everybody to follow it because it will set precedent for every city in Oregon. Thirdly, state law does not require us to do an urban growth boundary, even though I know we need it. We are under 10,000. Please look up the state law that says it is not required for towns under 10,000. We are under 10,000. So I just want to have our city grow steady, not crazy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Therese Kohler.
Hello, everyone. Therese Kohler, 1190 Jansen Court Sisters. At the risk of being on the edge of commenting about the tourist commercial district, I just wanted to point out that we just heard about the urban growth boundary expansion, most likely going into areas 5, 6, and 7, and that Camp Polk and Barkley and Wild Horse will, however they're developed, will be right nearby this tourist commercial zone. And I hope you keep that in mind, that before you make any decisions about the tourist commercial zone. Thanks.
Yeah, and feel free to cut them off if they're talking about.
Okay, thank you.
That's all.
All right. Thank you for everybody, and thank you for being concise in your points. And all right. Next up is the consent agenda. We have minutes and one other item. We have a motion for that.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
A second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that was everybody. All right, next up, council business, discussion and consideration of a motion to award community grant funds. Who's leading that discussion?
Well, I can give you some background information.
Please do.
Joe?
Joe's gonna pull up the spreadsheet too.
Of course.
It's Excel. You get to do it publicly and in front of everybody and show off.
To last year and in prior years, where, we solicited, grant applications. This year, there was 30,000 available, which, the council increased the budget, for this fiscal year for community grants. And how many applications did we?
27.
27. Yeah. And about 60,000 in total. So, similar to prior years, the council, went through the list and, did their own assessment for awarding, dollar amounts to the grant requests. And the purpose of tonight is to finalize that and put your stamp on it, in terms of your allocations.
Yeah, so as you can see, your allocations were averaged, and that's under the award call or the allocations
Yep.
column right there. If any item received 3 or more zeros on the allocation sheet, it was removed. So that's
So
you can
these
see
two.
those two, Sisters Farm Stand and Sisters School District, High School AV Club, are receiving 0 funds at this stage. And that leaves, we can scroll down just a little, $1,020 remaining to allocate
Okay.
in choose those, either of those two, or you can choose other ones as you wish.
All right, so we've awarded, as is with the averages, 28,980. Do we want to have a discussion about allocating the last 1,020, or is everybody happy with the way it is?
I think we should discuss, yeah,
Discuss what?
allocating and, Counselor Letts said she had some questions too. So,
Okay,
yeah, I think I mean, I would like us to consider allocating to the two that were taken off, because I know I had money going in there.
and we're not going back to that.
Oh, I thought we.
Well, we could, I mean, I suppose if
Yeah.
somebody changed their mind.
I mean, I also had money going to those two as well, so.
Yeah, so
I
I
didn't
guess we were the
feel
only
that
two.
they fit the criteria.
Well,
I didn't either.
There's one up there that I felt did not fit the criteria that is getting money, so,
yeah.
can you scroll down? I mean, I guess it doesn't all, there's a lot of grants, it doesn't all fit up there, or scroll up, I'm sorry.
So
Can you-
if three or more counselors allocated $0, then it was removed. The amount was so low.
Right.
And-
So we allocated to, two of us did.
That means the rest of us didn't.
You're right.
and
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna change my mind on those two.
Okay.
I'm
Well, I find I don't understand why I wouldn't like the AB club qualify. The Sisters High School AV club, especially when there's another organization that needs AV help. And the same and I thought that was kind of ironic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a group that's helping youth in the community, and that's certainly one of the things.
I don't want to argue and debate the merits of individual applications. I think that is, we were all told that if 3 counselors didn't support an application, it would be removed. So I don't think that that's an issue for discussion.
Oh, I didn't know that was a thing until just
Yeah, just now.
a minute
that's
ago.
when I heard
so,
it.
I
Yeah.
don't want to dispute what Rebecca said, but my
Okay.
understanding is if 3 counselors did not vote for the item to receive any funding,
Right.
they would be removed.
Right, and that,
they were
we
removed.
just heard that now.
Yeah, I was not aware.
Oh,
that was
okay.
Yeah.
a
That's
thing.
been the rule for, I don't know, as long as I've been on council, I think, or
No,
maybe.
for a while.
Yeah,
I don't remember
Um,
that in 3 years, but I forget things.
it's okay.
There's one organization up there that is a religious-based organization, which I feel may not be an appropriate use of tax dollars. You know, being that, you know, it could be a narrow, group of people that funding would go to, so,
Separation of church and state.
yeah, so I do have a concern about one of the groups up there, that is currently getting funding, so, but, you know, we also, yeah, I mean, we have, how much do we have left over?
1,020?
1,020.
Mr. City Manager, should we be concerned about an applicant being religiously based?
I'm pretty sure you've probably allocated grant funds to certain organizations.
Has that particular person received money from the city before?
No,
Yeah. Are they new or no?
Not Habitat.
Is that the homeschool one?
it's I believe when doing the research on the Commonplace Homeschool Cooperative, that is
Yeah.
a religious-based organization, so.
Oh, no, that's a new organization.
Mm-hmm, that's it.
Okay.
Not that, you know, their idea was bad or
If-
anything, it's just the use of public dollars, that's.
We have legal here. Is there any
Yeah.
issues? It's not.
Hey, chime in, Garrett.
It's not something he was prepared
Yeah,
for.
I'm a land use guy.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's all right. It's okay. Don't need to comment.
Okay,
Well, I'm in concurrence with Counselor Letts on that.
Okay.
So if we agree to not fund that group, then we end up with 1,520 that we could defer.
I don't agree to the changing it, so
Okay, well, you're one.
I like it exactly the way it is. I'm perfectly happy with giving away 28, whatever, 28.90, 28.80.
I am as well. I don't think we need to parcel out the last $1,000.
I do. We have it available and I feel that,
Where is Gary when we need him?
I mean, the Sisters AV Club has done a lot of, have had a lot of press over the last year about the great work that they've been doing on their own. And I think they made a great case in their
Yeah.
application, and it's a youth organization in a public school. So
Do we have a deadline by which we need to make this decision? Or can we postpone it till Gary's here?
I mean, ideally, it's usually by the end of the month that I think we notify organizations if they were successful in receiving funds. And we could postpone.
Well, I mean, this is our opportunity to deliberate, so, I mean.
And
that-
I think we have, and
Uh,
we've got a 2-2 vote.
Well,
I'm in favor of
well,
approving it as it is.
I haven't really heard a deliberation. I've heard each of us say what. we
Well, and
think
I've
we
said
should.
I'm not prepared to sit here and argue about
Well,
this.
that
They
deliberating is not
deserve 50 more
arguing.
dollars and they deserve 50 more dollars and
well, this is also the first time I've seen this.
Yeah.
I mean, have you seen this, the totals?
No,
Okay, so I mean, this is, in the past, this was always brought to us in the meeting and we've had time to digest it, so.
it
I
was-
just don't understand the rush, and we've always tried to maximize.
I'm not in a rush.
Okay.
I just don't, I think it's fine the way it is.
Okay, and are you open to any kind of consideration of changes?
With those two being removed, I don't mind talking about giving away the last bit of money. Where would you put it?
Well, that last bit of money could go to the high school.
3 people on the council have said no.
So it's been
Three? I
removed.
thought, I heard 2.
It obviously, Gary put a
Obviously,
0 as well because
Otherwise, it wouldn't
it
be.
was taken off.
Ah, correct. All right. Okay.
So without Gary, we can't really make that determination.
Well, I mean, unless one of you wanted to change your mind.
I already said I'm not changing my mind, so
Okay.
I don't understand the issue.
Okay, well, it's not an issue, it's
Yeah,
a discussion.
I was just curious why you didn't feel like they weren't, worthy. I'm curious because I'm kind of confounded by it.
I don't have the application and the materials in front of me. I made that determination on my own a couple weeks back, and I'm fine with that decision today.
Okay.
That's all I can tell you. I mean, I'm not.
All right, well, is there some group on here that we could offer a little bit more money to use up the total 30,000? Can we look at that?
I think that would be okay. Sure.
Okay, so,
What do you think? Is there one that's low that you think needs to be higher?
what do you think?
Well, I haven't had a lot of time to look at this.
I
so-
know. Hard for me because so what are this, can you say some of the ones that are the lowest so that we can just kind of peek at them real quick? Because I can't see it with my glasses even. Can someone read the names of the groups that have some of the lowest amounts so that we could decide if we want to bump them a little bit?
Well,
want
many of them
the-
are fully funded, so.
The lowest number, or do
Oh.
you want the lowest given the request that they made?
Are they all matched on the requests? No, okay, so are there any that have a request where they're less than what they've asked for in our offer?
Practically every single one is less than
Okay.
they requested.
Okay. So does anybody have any that they would like to give a little bit more to? I mean, I like the Rotary books for kids. I think that's a good one. We could bump that up a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine with me.
Yeah,
Also the
smart reading program aligning with the same kind of thing, reading.
Yeah, they're fully funded.
Oh, they both are?
No,
No,
Rotary Club is not. They're
Okay.
140 short.
okay.
The Sisters Outdoor Leadership Middle School program is about $300 short.
Any, I mean, are you guys okay with doing, bumping some of these up a little bit to bring it up
I
to the,
think those two you mentioned are fine.
okay? Are there,
So if you can, oh, sorry.
Yeah, if you can go ahead and update those while we're talking about it, if that's okay.
Those Rotary Club, Smart Reading,
yes,
that's fully funded.
Yeah.
smart reading is?
Uh-huh.
Okay, what about the Three Sisters Historical Society? Are they fully funded?
Nope.
Would you, council, be interested in giving them a little bit more close to their amount?
Well, I also brought up the Sisters Outdoor Leadership Program, which is also students.
Where's that?
Right here.
So they're 300 short.
Okay, so,
Yeah, you could, I mean,
Yeah,
if you'd
give
like to
them-
fully fund that, I'm okay with that.
yeah, there we go. Okay, that's another 300. And then the Three Sisters Historical Society? Are they fully funded, Joe?
Not even close.
No.
Okay,
You could give them the rest and it would still be short.
shall we do that? Give them the rest?
Yep.
Now we're at 30,000.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm okay with that.
Okay,
Not my favorite.
well, I'm happy with those changes.
Okay,
I would move approval of the community grant requests as we have awarded tonight. I second.
all right. All those in favor say aye. Thank you. All right. Next up, oh boy, here we go. This is a continuation of the hearing and consideration of ordinance 538. I have a long script, so let's get ready. It's going to take a bit of time. This is the time set for deliberations on City File TA 24-01, an application for text amendments to the Sisters Development Code, Chapter 2.12, Sun Ranch Tourist Commercial District, submitted by John Skidmore on behalf of Ernie Larrabee. This meeting is now called to order. Conduct of deliberations will be conducted as follows. Staff will make a presentation, entry of additional correspondence received into the record, questions of staff, if any, by council, and discussion and decision by council. At this time, I will ask if any counselor has any conflicts of interest. If so, please disclose the nature of the conflict and whether the member believes the conflict would preclude the member from objectively participating in these proceedings. Counselor Cobb,
No, I have no conflicts.
Counselor Letts,
None.
City Council President, well,
No.
and I feel I have no conflicts. Does any person in attendance desire to challenge the participation of any member of the council? We should check on Zoom as well. Apparently, there's nobody. Okay. Thank you. Now we can get to the staff report.
Mr. Mayor, point of order. Adam Smith on behalf of the applicant. I apologize for distracting the city council and I'll be very quick, but we're obliged to just object to the city council hearing testimony outside of the record being closed. I don't think any of that testimony was necessarily new, except for perhaps implications of the proposed text amendment on your UGB expansion project. Because of that, we would just encourage the city council to disregard the testimony that you heard tonight outside of the record. Alternatively, I think the only other solution would be to reopen the record, which gives the applicant the opportunity to respond. Our preference would be to keep the record closed and to proceed to deliberation so we can move this project along. But like I said, alternatively, I think the only other way to solve that would be to reopen the record.
Are you objecting about the public comment this evening?
Yes, the two public comments that were clearly directed at our project and outside of the record being closed.
Do fellow city councilors feel that they can move forward and disregard what was heard during those two public comments?
Yes.
Yes.
I feel I can as well.
Thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you. All right, on to staff report. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. Matthew Martin, Principal Planner, City of Sisters. This is a continuation of a public hearing process regarding text amendments to the Tourist Commercial District here in Sisters, file number TA 24-01 and corresponding ordinance number 538. Bit of background, City Council met on July 10th for public hearing to receive oral testimony and any additional correspondence. At the conclusion of oral testimony that evening, the oral record was closed, but the written record remained open until July 31st. I'll touch on the additional correspondence that were received during that open record period, but those have been provided to you in your meeting packet tonight. So just want to highlight a couple of items that were presented or discussed at the prior public hearing that staff would encourage or request that the City Council provide additional clarity on those topics that were discussed, but not yet decided. But certainly there's these and any others that you may consider further evaluation in your decision making. So highlighting those. First topic being an RV park as permitted or conditional use. The applicant has proposed, and it's been recommended by the Planning Commission, that RV parks be allowed as a permitted use, but it was discussed whether or not that should be elevated to conditional use, as in the Highway Commercial District where RV parks are allowed, it's a conditional use in that district. But we can discuss that further if you like. I just want to acknowledge that the primary intent of providing that as a permitted use versus conditional use is one, the limited area and scope of the tourist commercial district. So any compatibility surrounding uses that a conditional use permit review process would entail, because of the limited area that the tourist commercial district applies, you're effectively evaluating that now and applying any design or compatibility standards as part of specific use standards with this proposal. The second item being setbacks from Barclay Drive and Camp Polk Road. Currently 20-foot setback from those transportation features. The applicant's proposing a 10-foot setback. I think the primary intent of that is to be consistent with other commercial districts in the community that has a 10-foot setback from street side property lines. But again, looking for clarity on if the council would like to adopt that or retain the existing standard. Discussion on neighborhood market and retail sales establishments and how the size limit is calculated. The applicants proposed a maximum 1,000 square feet of such establishments within the district or on a site. Just want clarification if the council is looking to adopt that size limit as well as how it's calculated. And then lastly, length of occupancy in an RV park. It was discussed in detail, the opportunity, well, first, if there's interest in establishing a length of occupancy limit, the Planning Commission adopted a duration of stay of 30 days in a 90-day time period. Since the Planning Commission's review, the applicability of ORS 197-493 has been discussed and needs evaluated in that within that legislation or statute, there's a limit on a municipality establishing a time limit on how long one can live in an RV as a residential dwelling in an RV park that's connected to all utilities, water, sewer, electrical. What can provide some additional detail on that analysis, but what's unclear is what the intent of or what's meant by resident use of an RV as a residential dwelling. But what is clear is the tourist commercial district is a tourist oriented facility intended for temporary occupancy and limited duration of stay of any occupancy of a unit within the district. I know in the script, we have a separate item for additional correspondence, but just at this point wanted to highlight during the open record period, 4 letters were received, noting one from, on July 15th from Benson, July 30th from Russell, July 31st from Smith, the applicant's attorney, and then July 31st from Skidmore, the applicant's representative. And then to provide just a little additional detail on specific issues raised, again, noting that the applicability and compliance with ORS 197-493 was discussed at length, as I already noted. But it's important to note that there's ambiguity in the legislation in both our code, what constitutes a residential dwelling, but also noting that and reiterating that it's clear that the tourist commercial district is not a residential zone intended for long-term occupancy or residential development. And the intent of allowing an RV for temporary vacation occupancy in RV is within that scope of the intent of the district. In your packet, as noted, the applicant's attorney provided a submittal that provides legislative history and arguments of the applicability of that statute in this instance, and other opportunities for amending the proposal or the ordinance in providing some clarification language on what the applicability of the statute and limitations of long-term occupancy of an RV. So it can be captured, at least in staff and legal counsel's perspective, in providing some explicit connection to the verbiage and the terminology used in that legislation, if the council's interested in allowing RV parks and establishing a limit on the length of stay. And then lastly, in those comments from Benson, who is the owner operator of Sisters Eagle Airport, objected to allowing an RV park in the tourist commercial district. That was based on an opinion that RV park is an incompatible use in proximity to the airport, in particular in the transitional surface portion of the airport overlay district that's in the community. Just want to note that that incompatibility designation that's identified in Oregon Department of Aviation guidelines is just that, a guideline. It's not prohibited use, but rather that there's potential incompatibility of particular uses in proximity to an airport. And if that were the case, any incompatible use, there are options and recommendations that the Department of Aviation can offer to a developer to mitigate any of those impacts or incompatibilities. Examples that the Department of Aviation offered was, again, depending on location, is the painting of a roof of a structure or lighting on a structure to provide highlighting and visibility of a structure that may be close to encroaching one of those or penetrating one of those surfaces. But also want to note that currently in our city, in our development code, there are a variety of identified incompatible uses within that airport overlay district. Those include residential uses, schools, churches, transient lodging, and parks. Noting that with an airport in close proximity within your urban area, there will be development in close proximity to an airport, but rather than prohibiting, there's opportunities to look to mitigate those impacts based on the proposal, based on the location, or the unique circumstance for that development. So with that, just want to reiterate that we've gone through the process with the Planning Commission. They recommended approval of the proposal based on the findings that staff drafted, and staff's recommendation was approval of the proposed amendments, and that any decision by the city needs to be based on the review criteria. That's compliance with the Oregon State land use goals, the applicable policies of our comprehensive plan, the adequacy of public services, and compliance with the transportation planning rule. So I will leave it at that. Happy to answer any questions I can at
Okay.
this time.
That's the end of the staff report. Matt already brought up the additional correspondence, which is the next item, which is, I will read it so people know what the script says, which is, have we received any correspondence on this matter other than those items included in the agenda materials? The answer to that is,
Yes, as previously noted, can I take this opportunity to add a little bit of additional detail to my report?
sure.
I just want to acknowledge that, noting that the additional items that were discussed, but no resolution was identified at the previous public hearing. There will be in the decision-making process a need to provide that clarity. And if that clarity doesn't get to a very specific terminology or phrasing within the ordinance, there may be a need and a realistic outcome of providing direction to staff tonight that we will then return back with revisions to the ordinance prior to any decision or adoption of the ordinance. So that may be a potential outcome tonight.
I think that's understood.
Thank you.
But just to make sure, we did get 4 letters of correspondence. Is everybody comfortable with the information in them just as presented? And obviously, when we get there, we can ask questions.
Yeah, I read it. It was in the.
Okay,
package
I
we
just
just-
want to make sure that everybody got them and had a chance to review them.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
And let's be explicit that the comments this evening are not part of the record
That is
as,
correct.
Right.
thank you.
Okay. Now it's time for questions of staff. Number 6. At this time, do any counselors have any questions for staff?
I want to clarify my understanding on the conditional use. My understanding is that in other situations, conditional uses are placed on the zone in that no particular property is known well enough that what am I trying to say? That this is a unique, small enough property that we can know what those conditions should be up front. That we don't have to wait until the application arrives, because we can then review the standards and whatever that it's evaluated after the application arrives and deal with them there, because there's really only this one property that we're dealing with. So it's not a separate process that we really need to go through because it's only one property.
I agree with that statement.
If
Yeah, I mean,
That's your recommendation is what you're saying.
Correct. Yeah, because of the scope of the district encompasses around 12 acres and only smaller portions of 2 lots, but the entirety of a larger acreage. You know, whereas in the highway commercial district, you're involving, I don't want to estimate too highly, but
Dozens.
potential dozens at least, if not 100 in that district, in very different settings and potential compatibility or impacts on adjacent uses. So an opportunity to really reflect those unique circumstances.
I was
where-
originally concerned about not having a conditional use on there. After reading the information that you have provided, I think I understand why this particular property, doesn't really need that additional layer.
And recognizing that the additional design and development standards for RV park that are proposed address many of those compatibility related components that would be addressed during a conditional use review.
Right.
Yeah, but isn't that because this land use change is being driven by an applicant's request? And therefore, it is being designed for that applicant's request. And therefore, that is why it's unique to this little piece of property. And if then the developer does come forward and say, okay, yeah, I want to develop this for RV park, they've already laid the groundwork for that RV park.
And so there will not be public comment because it's not conditional use.
No, that's not true.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, that sounds aggressive.
that's
Just to
okay.
clarify.
Yeah.
So any proposal for an RV park or commercial development within this district would be subject to site plan review. So that would be a type 2 review that is subject to public comment and public notice. And so there would be certainly opportunity for the public to comment and provide input on the merits of a proposal.
Okay. Well,
Absolutely.
that's good to know. Because I was very uncomfortable with the not using conditional use since it's, for highway commercial, it's conditional use. Okay. I'm quite uncomfortable though, just in general, because, with the proposed land use changes, because, if one comes from the perspective of, that we are going to be proactive in making our code changes rather than reactive. We're definitely not doing that with this particular effort. And the other point is, if our goal is to simplify code, it seems to me having a variance of descriptions of what an RV park is in different districts that we've defined, I don't think that's a simplification of code. I think there should be one description for RV parks that no matter where it is, that's the description, and keeps it simple. So those are two of the main reasons I'm uncomfortable with this code change.
This is a questions for staff, not, this feels like a deliberation item.
Okay.
So just trying to stay with the script, sorry.
I just wanted to briefly respond. It is an applicant-driven application, so they came forward with a specific proposal, but it goes through the review of staff, planning commission, and council. So it's our job to say whether or not we agree, or ultimately your job, of whether you agree with that proposal or not. And it's certainly subject to amendment as you see fit. So just wanted to point out that just because it was the applicant initiated, doesn't mean that we have to accept it as written.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
It's good assurances though.
Thank you.
I mean, obviously. My question is about these, I think it's 4 items: permitted use or conditional use, the setbacks, the size limit of local market, and length of occupancy. These things you are expecting us to discuss during deliberation, is that correct?
That would be appreciated, because at the prior public hearing, there was a dialogue of various opinions, but I did not hear a consensus on a particular outcome on those.
We'll make,
Any revision if that's being
as
contemplated.
I'm leading the deliberations, I'll make sure that we touch on those 4 specific issues for sure. Any other questions of staff?
Is there any thing you can provide on, I guess, why the laundry facility was removed?
It was in coordination with the applicant of staff's opinion that a laundry facility was more of an ancillary or accessory use that would be in conjunction with an RV park or other overnight accommodations that were provided within the district. So as it's listed as a permitted use, there's a potential that a laundromat could be established there, and believe that the intent originally was actually just to provide that as, again, accessory use, and this is a chance to acknowledge that.
Sure. Okay. That makes sense.
Would you say it's fair to say that it's an amenity provided by the use already? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so just noting that it's common at a hotel, RV park to provide that, that amenity
Yeah, we didn't
in
have to do a
conjunction.
line item for a bathroom, because you kind of assume there will be a bathroom.
Agreed.
Okay. Any other questions before we move on?
The
Sorry.
10-foot setback is what is already on other commercial areas.
Correct.
And the reason that it was 20-foot originally, do you have any sense of why that was done originally?
I don't have full context on what the intent was at the time. I do want to acknowledge that at the time, in the commercial districts, there was a 0-foot setback from streets. And so if I'm inferring anything, that this was a distinction that we wanted to provide some separation from streets that was different from other commercial districts.
Just to be clear, do setbacks apply to parking areas as well?
In this context, no. When we're drawing these setbacks, it's from buildings and structures, from property line. There are different design standards for parking areas and drive aisles that require a separation and in many instances, a landscape buffer between those features.
Just wanted to make sure that everybody was clear on that. Okay. It's meaty, isn't it? It's
No,
a
it's
very meaty subject.
No.
Any other questions, Counselor Letts?
One clarification, are not many of the existing buildings in commercial areas and industrial areas and even some residential areas already within the overlay zone for the airport that is being brought up as a concern?
Yes, so the airport overlay district does encompass much of the community, all the way down to 242 on the south end, for one example. But within the district, there are varying surfaces. The one runway protection zone, which is the most restrictive area where buildings in our code are prohibited, for example. Then you have transitional, conical, and horizontal surfaces as it radiates away from the runway surface at the airport. So within those various surfaces, there's differing standards depending on kind of what the use is and the location of the property.
I was just trying to understand the concern of the airport, of the RV park, in the sense that what is already allowed is cottages or a hotel or any number of things, and how they would be less likely to be impacted by the airport and any accidents than an RV park would be. So, yeah,
But the height standards would apply to any of those items in
right.
in
I didn't-
portions of this zone.
I just didn't see why an RV park would be differently dangerous, more dangerous somehow than.
Well,
or
there
any more
also,
danger.
but there are also density restrictions as far as number of people per in certain areas of that zone as well, correct?
Of the airport overlay district.
Right.
Yeah, and primarily you're back to looking at the runway protection zone where congregations of people are limited.
So no matter what we're allowing in this zone, whether we accept this application or not pass this ordinance or not, they're all covered by the same standards of the airport protection areas.
Correct.
Okay,
Whether it's RV or not.
I think that's all of my questions.
Before I close this hearing, I did want to consult with Garrett a little bit about the next part of the process.
Hearing's already closed.
Oh, excuse me, before we moved on to the next deliberations. During deliberations, are we still able, if we have questions of staff, can we still go back to them, even though we're going to be moving on from questions of staff to actual deliberations? If we need clarification, is that okay?
Yes, yeah, staff can provide answers to procedural questions, to, recapping what's in the record, but not bringing in new evidence.
Okay. During council deliberations, our options are, according to the script, approve the amendments as proposed, approve the amendments with changes, or deny the amendments. This is all before we even vote on the ordinance itself. We're just agreeing on the amendments themselves, correct?
Correct. I mean, there's going to be a bunch of procedural hoops that we may or may not have to jump through with regard to adopting an ordinance, depending on how much rewriting on the fly we're going to do tonight.
Okay.
So what I think we're definitely the goal tonight is to at least hone in on where are you going with those three options.
Okay.
And if we're going to be doing some amendments, you know, how deep we get into that tonight, so that if it's close enough, maybe we can proceed to an ordinance. If it's, you know, enough that you need something more polished to look at, and we can avoid having to, you know, read amendments out loud as we adopt an ordinance. I mean, I think most people would choose to avoid that if we could.
Okay. All right. So I think it's time for us to go on to council deliberations with the idea of those three items, approve the amendments as proposed, approve the amendments with changes, or deny the amendments. I think we have things to discuss, though, about the amendments. Is that correct?
Mhm.
Should I start with the four items that that
Yeah.
they definitely want clarifications on?
Mhm.
Would that be fair?
Sure.
Let's get those, permitted use or conditional use. Does anybody have strong opinions one way or the other?
I was very concerned about the conditional use, the lack of conditional use originally. After reviewing the information and getting clarifications from Matt, I see it as redundant. If people feel that it is another layer of checks and balances and is necessary for their comfort, I can understand that. I felt that way too. I no longer feel that it is necessary. So that's where I am on that. I think it does not require a conditional use.
Yeah, I agree with Counselor Blum.
And I'm pretty much like that too.
If RV is included in this change, then I can live with conditional use.
Okay.
We're losing the conditional use.
Well, it's not, it was recommended for a permitted use, and so we're not making a change to that if enough of us agree that
Right, it's a permitted use.
the permitted
it's not
use,
a
and we're gonna.
I misspoke. I meant to say I can live, if the RV is going to remain in the code, I can live with it being permitted use based
Okay.
on the explanation.
So that is a no change to the amendment. Okay, just so everybody's clear that means we're agreeing with the recommendations of both staff and the planning commission. Okay. Setbacks.
Once again, I have seen no reason why this particular area would have a different setback than other commercial zones. Nobody has any particular historical information about why that might have been. So I don't see any reason why to treat it differently. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
Okay. The PC and staff are recommending to change that to 10 feet at request of the applicant. Is that correct? Or that would be a no change.
As proposed.
As
Correct.
proposed. Okay, just want to make sure. I'm gonna do this every bit.
Yeah.
Size limit 1,000 square feet. Okay. The calculations about the neighborhood market to include or not to include the storage portions of it. Is that kind of what one of the sticking points was?
It was not to include 1,000 feet. I think it's reasonable to have 1,000 feet. Doesn't seem like a whole heck of a lot. But it's a small area to begin with, and I can see why a little market there would be an advantage for people who use Camp Polk. It would be an advantage for people in the RV park. It would keep people from having to cross town to just pick up a quart of milk. So I do think that 1,000 feet just for the market and not the accessory buildings, because everybody has trash buildings and storage areas and whatever in addition to that, that seems reasonable. Mhm.
I think I'm okay with it too.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
Okay, so we're not changing that. Length of occupancy, recommended 30 out of 90 days. There are concerns about the residential use and, the state statute. I personally think that I feel fairly comfortable with us not worrying about that in the sense that it's pretty clear that this is not a residential zone and we don't intend it to be a residential zone. Obviously, there are always situations where people might try and challenge that. It's quite possible, but not likely, I would say is probably the most accurate thing to say. So I am fine with it the way it is.
And the way it is includes some language about
It's the
30
maximum of 30 out of 90 days. Do I understand that correctly? Is that what is
So
the
that,
way it's written now?
so what's before you,
Yes, thank you.
in the draft that's presented to you tonight does not include the 30 days and 90-day
Right.
Oh,
time
it does
period.
not include.
No.
Right. But I do want to acknowledge that the planning commission's recommendation was to include the 30 days and 90-day time period.
Once again, after reading the legislative language surrounding the passage of that, it seemed pretty clear that they were talking about residential. And so I think, although there is a chance that it could be challenged, it is, these are not residential dwellings and it's not a residential zone. So it seems like a pretty strong, a difficult claim that somebody could make that, oh, well, this says that I can live in my RV if I want to, so I'm going to make a big issue out of it. I don't know. I don't see that happening.
Well, I'm concerned about the law, the OR's 197.193. And you mentioned something about the intent of the district, but we can't really legally stand on an intent. And I thought maybe you mentioned something about long-term occupancy, so maybe a statement that long-term occupancy is not allowed could be added in there somehow. I don't know.
Yeah, that certainly could be considered. I'll defer to legal counsel.
Yeah, I was gonna say, there's kind of two different things going on here. I mean, first, if you guys, just be clear, are you wanting it to be, do you want residential uses to occur? And if the answer is no, then I think it would behoove you to avoid issues with that particular statute to just include expressly residential uses and occupancies are not permitted.
There you go.
Then the follow-up question though is, okay, but what is a residential use? And you'd think that would be a relatively straightforward answer, but the truth of the matter is that it's not presently defined in the land use code. It's not defined in the statute under which, in the chapter under which this statute exists. It is defined in other places, including the landlord-tenant chapter of state statute. It's also found in the transient room tax sections of state law and local code. And so if you don't define it, then certainly there's at least some possibility that people will get into that subjective argument of what's residential use. No, I don't intend it to be my residence. Is that enough? That sort of thing. Or you can make the election to objectify it by establishing a set period of time for occupancy. And then even then, there's kind of some varying flavors of that because as the applicants pointed out, there's now kind of 30 days is kind of the historic standard for residential uses under landlord tenant and is the defining period between what is a transient room occupancy taxable stay versus a non-taxable stay. The landlord tenants have now made at least some opportunities to go up to 45, but again, that kind of inconsistent with the transient room tax thing. So long story short, it is kind of a opaque issue. And if you're fine with that, you can leave it at just kind of flat, no residential uses, and staff will have to administer it accordingly, or you can objectify it. And if so, what is the number?
So, oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Is there, I mean, the sticking point seems to be that this term RV park, which has many interpretations. And it's, I mean, is there any value? Is there a defined definition in our code or state code for campground? Because that is more, I think, fitting, you know, what I think we're trying to do here, and kind of eliminates the overlap with other types of RV parks.
Yeah. Well, the answer is yes, and there's also at least a definition under this particular statute that's at issue too. And so part of the recommendation would be, again, if the idea is to mitigate the potential for residential uses to occur, would be to mirror some of that language in there. Is it the clearest definition? No, but there is at least a definition. And so that's another way to mitigate the potential for that statute to come into play.
Yeah, I feel like because this isn't a residential zone, it's tourist commercial, you know, I feel like the intent's pretty darn strong, you know, but it's like we were talking about earlier, worst case scenario, right? You kind of plan for worst case scenarios. So, you know, the only sticking point to me is that there are people who, you know, live in their RVs full time, and they travel, and, you know, they're not, you know, have very nice equipment and move around, and have a post office box somewhere, and don't have a permanent address. So, that's like, that's one of the examples of where it gets very gray. You know, people like that. So, you know, I'm just trying to think of worst case scenario situations here, and just trying to, just try to find a way to make it as clear as possible. But I still feel like, you know, excuse me, staff made a pretty good argument on it's still tourist commercial. The intent is, I think in that zone name is pretty clear. It's not residential. The RV park we have on the east side of town is zoned residential. RV park. I mean, that is a long-term RV park. Again, mobile home, you know, there are no mobile homes. They're mobile. They're not mobile homes.
Manufactured homes.
Yeah, they're no manufactured homes. Thank you. You know, but again, that's, you know, using the same name, a very different scenario and very different use and need in the community. So it's just kind of ridiculous for you having the same terminology for two different things.
The other
Very
thing,
different things.
yeah, and you know, I have similar concerns, but the other thing that sometimes we like to say is, you know, sometimes we, you know, pass things up at this dais and we go, hey, it's not written in stone. If we have a problem with that, we could certainly react to it if we had to. Are we gonna have a problem with it? I mean, I don't feel like anybody feels like we will, but you kind of never know sometimes. And so I think we have to decide, you know, do we want to clarify it, or is it such a slim margin that we, you know, I think that's the discussion, you know, do we want to say 30 out of 60 days, like 30 out of 90 days, like the planning commission recommended? It's been taken out since, so the current amendment has got no time about it at all. So we would just be saying, okay.
It'd be
And-
up to the management.
Yeah, it'd be up to, you know, up to, whatever actually happens. And so,
Well, if I could kind of sum up here what I think
might solve it is we add the statement that it's residential use occupancy not permitted. Residential use occupancy is not permitted, and provide a definition for residential use occupancy in our code so that we make it perfectly clear. And if that's the numbers that the planning commission came up with, then that's the numbers, you know, the 30 out of no longer than 30 out of 60 days or whatever it is.
And do we, I think this has been addressed, but I can't remember, so I apologize, but you know, there's also supposed to be a caretaker's quarters there as well, which is highly potential, obviously, for somebody to be full-time resident there, so. Does that muddy the waters? At
A
all?
permanent structure, isn't it? Or no? Doesn't have to be, I guess.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
it is an exception to the prohibition.
Yeah.
So does it open the door to some degree? Sure, it seems pretty minimal, and I think the concept is that it's, would say, no residential uses except for the caretaker's residence.
And that was included in the language approved by the planning commission.
Okay.
But that's not what's before us.
Correct. Just need to be clarified or not.
So you end up implementing this. What language do you see as being not the easiest, but given what we want, the language that will likely get us what we want? Do you see either the planning commission's recommendation or the way it is now as being easier to explain to people and to interpret and to follow? Or do you not have a sense of how it's going to play out and we just kind of need to do something and see how it goes?
So I will remind you that staff took that part out.
Yeah.
So you're
So
asking for recommendations that
That
they've
they've
already
already
made.
made the
They've already made,
recommendation
so
was to.
I think it's on us to
say,
insert what we want to insert.
yeah,
You know what I mean? I mean, that's,
yeah,
we're at that point. So
yeah, I just.
don't have to answer that.
Yes, you do.
I mean, we want you to
No,
answer it
no.
kind of, but at the same time, we have to take responsibility for this last.
So
push
are
fast.
we, I mean, are we in some kind of agreement that we want to say something like, that, you know, it's not permitted, for residential use?
I would be.
Make it perfectly clear.
I would be just fine with adding that phrase all by itself and not worrying about timeframes. And the reason I say that is because there may be cases where somebody might take a job here and work out of their RV, and they might be there for 45 days,
Mhm.
but they're not, it's still not a residential use. They're just on a temporary job.
Right.
And
Somebody in your family falls ill and they're
right.
home and they need to RV. to
And I
for a
think
couple
that-
Months kind of thing.
And I think that that would give not only us and staff, but just the community in general to have a little bit of flexibility without trying to nail down every time detail that we could come up with. And if we put a phrase, residential use is not permitted, I think that that covers us fairly well without getting into the weeds about, 30 out of 90 days or 45 out of 6 months or whatever. And I think it would make it easier to get these amendments agreed, so then we can talk about the ordinance itself as a whole.
Okay.
How does that
What
sound?
do you think about that?
I mean, it's plainly your discretion as to how long you want people to live there. It's, I mean, I do think just being clear about, are we permitting residential uses, are we not, is, you know, the threshold, address that at the bare minimum.
Mhm.
And if you want to do the extra layer, that's
Yeah.
on you.
Yeah.
I'm perfectly acceptable to me to put, residential use is not permitted and add that phrase.
And this may be more of a question for legal counsel, as you contemplate adding, not allowing residential use, do we need to clarify?
Except
Ex-
for the caretakers.
Right.
or
Right.
Yeah.
caretaker.
If,
Yeah.
if he says
That's what
so,
I mean,
we can
yes.
add that too.
Yeah. Agree.
Okay?
Okay,
So
so we, other than that one statement,
approve
have
with,
approved the amendments.
with one singular change, which residential use is not permitted except for a caretaker,
Or what do we want to call?
whatever the words are that.
The
and
manager, RV manager,
Someone please wordsmith that.
yeah.
Yeah, and I did have one question about another
Okay,
change that wasn't in the top four.
Mhm.
okay, that's fine.
You had, do you have any more questions?
Mhm,
Oh,
I do,
okay.
yeah.
Wanted to clarify as we do some wordsmithing here, acknowledging that residential use is not a defined term in our code. However, dwelling unit is a defined term. So the use of that,
Well, I mean, that's kind of the chicken and egg problem we're gonna have with this approach of not defining it. I guess I would say, you know, it's residential uses and occupancies, because I think that is a little bit more, a little broader, but again, it's not the clearest.
Yeah,
and the phrasing for the caretaker is caretaker's quarters.
caretaker's quarters, okay. So residential use and occupancy is not permitted excepting caretaker quarters.
Does that sound good?
Yeah, what do we say in other zones that don't allow residential use?
Specifically, they're just not a permitted use.
So in our little chart, it'll say N for not permitted. There'll be a little asterisk and it'll say except caretaker's quarters. Is that kind of how it would look in the code?
It will be included under section 2.12.1000 and
Okay,
1000C, the specific use standards for RV parks.
okay.
Okay.
I wrote that down so I can rattle it off. Okay. So those four things are taken care of. Okay with everybody?
Yeah.
Other
those four things,
concerns?
Yes.
Please, go ahead.
Okay, so I am not comfortable with having the RV in this code for the Sun Ranch Tourist Commercial District. I don't think it's the right location for an RV park. I've read all the letters from people, read all the documentation, as I know all other counselors have, and I just feel that I think we need to pay attention to those concerns. And even before people spoke today, I mentioned to the city manager.
I'll just
yesterday.
remind you again that what was said today is not part of the record.
Right.
It's not to be
And what I'm
considered.
saying is that I spoke to the city manager yesterday about what I'm about to say now, which is I am not comfortable with, having an RV park where we are considering expanding our urban growth boundary. At the same time, we don't know what we're going to be developing there in these areas, and I just think it's not the right time and it's not the right place for that RV park design. So I am happy with many of the other changes in this section of the code. I think we should keep the retail sales and the hostel, and I think we should keep the cottages. And other than that, I just want the RV park part taken out. And I'm happy with the design theme taken out. Jennifer, you had another question?
Yeah, just about the design theme. So just to clarify, if that's removed, they're not, they're also not subject to the downtown commercial design theme either, right?
Now, the Western Frontier design theme is applicable to all commercial districts.
Oh, all commercial districts.
including
Okay,
this
so,
one.
so that
Including
would
this
then
one.
just move into that. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
I'm okay with the RV park, and the reason excuse me, so sorry. Need to get up close to the mic. The reason I'm good with that is because, in my opinion, an RV park is a tourist commercial type entity. Accepting residential. And I think we've kind of dealt with that. So I'm okay with that. And so other than those 4 amendments that we discussed, but we're only going to actually add 1, I'm okay with the direction that we were going. And I would move forward with these text amendment changes as they are.
I'm also, I'm kind of excited about the potential of having an RV park. I think our RV park is heavily utilized, and I hear nothing but glowing reports about, you know, how great it is to have another option for people to stay in this community that maybe is at a lower price point than some of the other options in the community, and that to have walking distance. It's also something that I think moves into the shoulder season a little bit. We've heard earlier about how some of our smaller businesses are struggling. And I think that this will only add. It's a unique kind of proposal. Looking at the urban growth boundary and potential for what would be across from it, when that area is developed, we will be looking at if there is UGB expansion on Camp Polk across the street from this, well, then maybe that would be a potential area for commercial. We need more commercial, we need more industrial. It isn't all going to be housing. So if it's right across the street from some commercial, that may very well be what a developer comes with is that would be commercial. And I see having a little market there as being an asset to that community. So I don't have any issues with the RV park, and I think the recommendations that we have been asked to make tonight, I feel very comfortable with now, having had the time to really think it over and review it and look at all the testimony that has been submitted.
Yeah, and I'll say that, I don't have a problem with it either, because it's not, it's not mandating that there will be an RV park and that we'll be there forever. And it's just an option in that zone. In RV parks, there's also something that more easily than other developments can evolve into other uses over time, because there's usually not a ton of infrastructure or structures. As the community grows and maybe grows in that direction, it might evolve into some other land use, but underneath this code, excuse me. So I'm okay with where we've landed.
Okay, so it appears that there's a majority decision to not consider removing RV parks, removing that particular use. So that doesn't seem to be a consensus on that. So it's going to stay in. Do we need to
Want to approve with change?
approve the amendment with changes and then have a vote on the file itself? Is that correct?
That's the direction I think you guys are headed in.
Okay.
So if
All right, so.
nothing further to deliberate.
Okay. So whoever's going to do the motion is going to have to add, I'll read the change if you want to do the motion with the single amendment text change that says, and I'll say it now, but we'll say it again in the motion, okay? Residential use and occupancies are not permitted excepting caretaker's quarters. Is that language acceptable? As far as the intent that we're trying to do.
I recognize that. I just want to get a head nod from legal counsel or comment.
Yeah.
Is there a different way to say it? If there is, please just let me know and I'll say it.
No, I think really it's just where are we sticking it in?
2.12.1000 C is what I heard.
At the correct section.
Yeah.
That's the new section that's applicable to RV parks that's been added.
Yeah, so if you're specifying the language and where it's going, that's sufficiently defining enough, yes.
Okay. I will say that.
It would be a new,
So I will
yeah,
help out with the motion.
Okay,
we can just add it.
So we're talking option one,
Option
I do.
2.
option two. Mhm. Option two, approval of the amendment with changes, right, okay. I move to recommend to city council approval of city file TA 24-01, subject to the following proposed changes.
Add the phrase, residential use and occupancies are not permitted excepting caretaker's quarters in section 2.12.1000 C. We have a motion. We have a second.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. We'll do roll call vote for ordinance, correct?
It's not an ordinance.
Yeah, this is a text amendment.
Yeah,
Yeah, roll call vote.
yeah, roll call vote.
But so that was to approve the actual application.
Okay, sorry, we're just doing the text amendment.
Correct, so that was the application itself.
Okay, let's read it again. That's okay, we can do that. So just,
What?
do we need a motion and a second, or do we just head nod the?
So now,
It's-
now you're into the,
It said that it's time for a roll call vote, but we don't need that.
no, okay, so, but we're not in the ordinance yet. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, well, right,
We're in the, what are we doing with this application here?
okay.
Okay, so let's do a vote on the
Application.
proposed
Yeah. So
text.
you already have a motion on approving the application, and so now
let's
you can vote on the application.
But we don't have to do a roll call, is that what you're saying?
It's better to do a roll call.
Okay.
Yeah, but we're not on the ordinance yet.
Right,
That's what-
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not,
so this is just on the change.
yes, just on the text amendment.
Mayor Breeden,
Yes.
Council President Blum,
Yes,
Councilor Letts,
Yes.
Councilor Cobb.
Yes.
All right. All right. Now we have motion for ordinance approval. Is this correct? Are we in the right spot now?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, this is quite complicated, but we have to do this right. We have to say it right. I ask for the motion to be read, ordinance 538 by title. So I need a motion.
I move to have,
I'm sorry,
Title only.
title only.
yes, I move to have the city manager read ordinance 538 by title only.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Do we have it read now, or do we have to vote on it first?
Yeah, you gotta vote.
City manager read.
Well, you have
Okay,
to
all
vote
those
on-
in favor of reading by title only, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, this is the first reading ordinance number 538, an ordinance of the City of Sisters amending Sisters Development Code, Chapter 2.12, Sun Ranch Tourist Commercial District, that expands and clarifies the types of allowed uses and applicable development standards.
Okay, so now we need a motion to adopt the ordinance, option 2.
I move to recommend to city council approval and adoption of ordinance 538, city file TA 24-01, subject to the following proposed changes.
The proposed change is the phrase residential use and occupancies are not permitted excepting caretaker's quarters in section 2.12.1000 C.
And I'm sorry to make you restart again, but I thought I heard recommend to approve as opposed to approve.
Yeah, the language here
Yeah,
says
I think that
recommend,
was the
okay. I
first
move
draft of that.
to that the city council approve and adopt
The,
ordinance 538. Does that work? City file TA 2401, subject to the following proposed changes.
add the phrase residential use and occupancies are not permitted excepting caretaker's quarters to section 2.12.1000C. Do we have a second?
I second.
Okay, roll call vote, please. Counselor Cobb.
No.
We have a nay. Counselor Letts.
Yes.
Council President Plum.
Yes.
I am a yes. It was not a unanimous vote, for the motion fails. A second reading of ordinance 538 will occur on Wednesday, August 28th, 2024 at 6:30 PM at the regular city council meeting. Good? Yep. Okay, thank you all. On to other business, staff comments. Thank you, Garrett, for all that.
Thank you.
It's a little complicated. Yeah.
Yeah, it gets a little complicated when you have the application file that you have.
Yeah.
For before you get to the ordinance.
Little things.
Thank you.
But they mean,
Writing that down.
yeah, that was. Okay, go ahead.
Great, yeah. Got a few updates here. First, thanks to Carrie Prosser for holding down the fort during my vacation. She did a lot of outreach over the last couple of weeks. We've had a lot of public events, National Night Out,
Oh my gosh.
the Hometown Hang. So opportunities to kind of do some tabling. I think the VIT folks were doing some tabling at the Hometown Hang. So yeah, it's been busy. The public safety survey is out. I think we have over 300 responses so far. That survey closes on the 25th. So encouraging everybody to take that survey. It's pretty short, but an opportunity to kind of weigh in on public safety and traffic and things like that in our community. Today we had a houselessness partners meeting, and I'm sure the mayor and council president will touch on that. They were in attendance.
Wasn't gonna mention it.
Just my thoughts. Today was more focused on, I think the entire time, on how we're going to be engaging the public in the next step with the community conversation, the roundtables that we're kind of narrowing down on a date in October, early October for that. So a lot of just focus on how do we get the public involved? What does that look like? What are the logistics? How do we communicate that out to the public about the upcoming meeting?
First week of October.
First week of October, likely a Sunday the 6th, but we'll make sure we finalize that before we start publicizing that out there too much. Update on Explore Sisters are working on the strategic plan this fall, so they're going to be working on that. But I did want to plug the visitor center at the Makerspace. If you haven't been in there, stop in. It looks great. They got some good information up on the wall. Some nice updates to that little space in the Makers building. So it's great to see that happen. And then finally, speaking of vision, the progress report for 2023 was released. That's something the VIT works on an annual basis. And so that's available, I think was sent to you by email. So thanks to C4C and our VIT partners for working on that. Kind of keep the public informed on what's going on with all the vision work. Okay, moving on to development services, still working through code amendments. You heard Matt mention today that the defensible space is moving forward. That's going to, I think, come to council in September. So working through that, and that's going to be pretty meaty. And then we do have a public hearing. I think we're scheduling for council next month as well on short-term rentals. So I think that's coming to you with that ordinance on September 11th. So we got to communicate that out, but yeah, I know you've been waiting for that. So that's finally kind of worked through the planning commission, and we're gearing up to get that in front of council for adoption before the end of the year here in the fall. Also another amendment that in the development code that I think the council talked about around goal setting, but a little bit before was the private tree removal and some of the penalties associated with that. So that's gone to the UFB, the Urban Forestry Board, and then is scheduled to be reviewed by the Planning Commission next before coming to you all for adoption. Otherwise, we're continuing to get development building permit applications from Sunset Meadows and Woodlands. They're kind of slow but steady, and buildings occurring there. As you know, the county has kind of cut back on their development services department because of sort of the slowdown the rest of the county. They notified us about just being aware that things may be a little slower than usual in terms of building, permit review. We haven't really experienced it yet, but we're kind of giving builders a heads up that that may be the case, that as the county's staffing kind of changes. We're also waiting for the Sisters Habitat for Humanity Adams Street project to come in. We haven't gotten the land use application on that quite yet, but we're thinking it's coming in pretty soon.
Adams Commons?
Adams, is that what it is? Adams Commons, yeah. Okay, Public Works. If you've tried to drive down McKinney Butte, you notice it's closed. So council had that emergency meeting or special meeting a couple weeks ago. That contract is in, and contractors working on those safety improvements with those raised crosswalks. So that's happening this week. So traffic would be reopened, I think, after all the concrete is cured, the week of the 26th of August. So before school starts, but they're working fast to get that in before for the new school year. We have things coming up in terms of bidding. East Portal Phase 1 is scheduled to go out for bidding on the 28th of August, with bids due a month later. And then we'll bring it back to city council approval probably in early October. And then work starting as soon as November. So here comes the East Portal, or new name to be soon determined, and completed possibly by next summer. Barclay Phase 1, we're expecting the bid specs to be completed by September, and then going out to bid in October for that project too. So again, another project that we hope to have completed by next summer will be the first phase of Barclay. And then things are happening with all the West Side Pump Station, the Rope Street Pump Station, Well 1 and Well 3 are all under design. So on the water and wastewater projects are moving forward too. All right, and then finally, report from our spreadsheet expert. We got a good result from our audit of our workers' compensation. So we received some savings there in terms of our premium over what we expected. So great job on diving into the books on that and getting us a little savings there.
B++?
A lot of stuff starts up with the new fiscal year, closing the books on July, and then we're happy new fiscal year, right? Already over a month in to the new year. One thing that I saw, just a little tidbit, is that our TLT ended up at budget, or not a little bit better than budget. So if you remember Joe's reports throughout the year on our quarterly updates that we're trending a little low. Well, lo and behold, we had a good beginning of summer. May and June came in good, and we ended up a little bit above budget. So there's heads in beds, and tourists still coming to town. And then finally, we're working on the URA, the Urban Renewal Area, our agency line of credit. And I think we're coming to the council next meeting in the Urban Renewal Agency to have an urban agency meeting to get that line of credit in place for approval. So that's going to free up some dollars to go ahead and spend on things like the West Side Pump Station and some of these projects, including public art that were
30 more days till the deadline.
Yes, we have a handful in. We're hoping for some more. I think there's like 4 or 5. Carrie's not here, but I think there's like 4 or 5 submittals so far. Hopefully we can get some more. According to other places like Bend, there's a lot of artists that submit that stuff at the last minute. So we're hoping we'll see more. So
I think you will.
Yeah. And that's it. Yeah.
Do you have any
That covered it.
questions for staff? Are you guys glad that's over?
Oops, sorry.
Okay, never mind.
No
You don't have
comment.
to answer.
I expected confetti.
Cheesecake. I don't know.
I know if this is I'm not going to address any of the public comments that were not supposed to be part of the record. But we did talk about fire hardening tonight, and just to clear up some misinformation that may have been issued outside of the TA, but just about the designation of high, moderate. You can build in high risk areas as a map currently stands. It's just what's required with those building. And in fact, the council's interested in having those requirements apply citywide, right? So there's nothing that prohibits any kind of development in areas that are mapped as high risk.
No, I think that my point, and this is just me, but I think the rest of council kind of agrees, we want the ability to decide for ourselves what we want in our city, and I think that that's probably the biggest sticking point. Having one particular map that I think everybody kind of agree that it's not truly representative of what it's trying to do, and then them being able to hold every community across, there's 248 cities in the state of Oregon, I know, because I know, because I'm the mayor, there's 241 mayors. I think most of those mayors, and I think most of those councils and people want to be able to determine for themselves and their community. We have experts on our councils and within our communities that know better than the state sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes we just need to, it's kind of like the water discussion. I think we know our Deschutes aquifer better than the state does. And I think that we're a little tired of getting pushed around all the time on some of these requirements that kind of don't make sense. Is that fair
Yeah,
to
and
say?
then to say, and you can't do anything more stringent than that.
Yeah, well, that's kind of even weirder, if you ask me. So I think that hopefully our constituents and the people that were here tonight understood, that's why we're asking. We're not looking to make it more lenient or make it easier for fire to wipe through the community. We're just trying to be able to apply standards to everybody, because it's not really fair to only do it to half, and it doesn't make any sense anyway.
I don't know how you would even write code like that.
Yeah.
A matter of fact, it would probably go straight to LUBA, right? I mean,
Code, write a code for each individual tax lot in the
Well,
town.
you just have to say, well, look at the map, whatever
we're
the
just gonna
map
say.
says, then we,
yeah,
yeah. Yeah,
So
it's
anyway,
crazy.
I think I recognize that we mostly don't buy that, and I think it's gonna be important for us to do, proper commenting about that. And I think that's the biggest sticking point. I mean, we could sit there and argue all day about what the map's good or accurate or whatever, but it's as much the precedent that the map is making and the actions that we can or cannot take because of the map. To me, that's absolutely the biggest issue, whether it's accurate or not.
Yeah, it's just, again, just some of the comments, it's just another thing for us to be aware of and, kind of help the public understand sort of the map. It does complicate it for us because we heard it tonight about the urban growth boundary. We're looking at areas that are, the exception areas are in the high risk, but that's not a part of any kind of criteria for urban growth boundary expansion.
No.
And those are actually existing residential areas already, right? It's not just vacant land that is.
And any new construction is gonna follow the guidelines that we
Right,
set up.
and it will
I mean,
be low
that's
risk out of
part
the
of it.
build.
I mean,
Including like fire hydrants.
if we
and-
can,
Right.
if we're allowed.
Building
roads.
standards.
Right.
If we're allowed
Right.
to create building
Right.
standards. Maybe the map tells us we can't. I don't know. Anyway, thank you for that. What else?
To you guys.
It's so weird not to go around the room.
Yeah.
You want to go ahead?
Okay, so I have kind of a fun thing that I shared with Jordan, so on this map, I don't know if you noticed, but there's this little tributary that comes off of Whitechoose Creek.
I saw
It's
that.
unnamed.
I saw that.
And I think it would be really fun, if it truly is a creek, that it would be really fun for the city to have a little contest to name it. I came up with Baby Choose, but it could be, it could be really cute, so I think it might be something to consider, fun thing.
Speaking of that, how's the naming policy stuff going? I mean, that's,
Yep, it's going well. We have a draft, and I think we're planning to bring it to you September 11th for a
Okay.
workshop.
okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So I don't know,
That was
I don't know if the naming policy
does
covers
the creek go,
unnamed streams.
does it go into the city limits?
It comes, it's out of and then goes into the city limits.
Okay, so that's-
It comes off of Whitechoose and then joins Whitechoose.
Don't be surprised if the state overrides us on that.
Well,
Yeah. Well, we could ask their
I'm
permission.
just saying.
Yeah.
I'm being provocative. What you got?
It's been a while since we've been all together.
She's got a lot.
So I told you, I already harangued about the meeting earlier this week, that Commissioner Chang put together to kind of discuss those issues. So, there was a lot of mouths agape during that conversation. So it was good.
It's a reaction.
And I think, can't remember if I said this, but Senator Golden did, agree that the wording was very confusing at best and dysfunctional at worst, and was going to look into it, and, he was already kind of trying to
Just
get
to
ahead
be
of that.
clear, what wording are we talking about?
Oh, just that because, in this whole process, we had this belief that we could, it's fine, we could do more stringent code if we wanted to, and, their code will be fine, and now it's like, if you're not in this layer and then this layer, then you can't do, so, yeah, he said that he was going to try to look into that and address that. I don't know if that meant like this week or like in January when they all get back together. I don't know what that meant, but he was keyed in on that as well, which was good. He was paying attention. Okay, we attended a SCED meeting in July with Eric. And EDCO also attended the Sisters Pub Talk that Eric put together. And you were there for a little while, right? You came?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was fantastic. It was so fun, and it was, especially from the economic development side, excuse me, that highlighting art as a traded sector economic driver. We don't think of it in that respect, especially kind of under the banner of EDCO and traded sector, but it's like the majority of people who, come to Central Oregon and buy art, are tourists and leave with that art, or they order it from artisans here and it's shipped out. So it was really fascinating to hear about that, the world that they live in economically and the same challenges they have, and, copyright infringement, and, making sure they have a good CPA and a good lawyer, like, the rest of us with businesses, large and small, some of the problems are the same. There was good attendance for that as well, and the smoke held off, which was great. I've attended 2 bicycle and pedestrian advisory committee meetings in the last month, just the way the calendar laid out. They do have, I'm going to talk to Jordan and Paul a little bit about it, but they know there's a very large grant opportunity through ODOT with some federal dollars in the Community Paths program. They have $61 million, which is enormous, and will probably be the only time we ever see that much money in a program like this, but specifically for really geared towards paths, not like necessarily bike lanes or sidewalks or anything like that. So for, our own personal uses, I mean, I know we have a lot of paths planned as well. So I think we're going to be addressing that grant process. And also planning a summit. They usually do an annual summit, and we decided that will be in Bend this year, and we're really going to try to up our attendance. So I expect you all to be there. You can carpool with me. And then UGB steering committee, but you learned all about that. So that's it.
We heard about it tonight.
Yep.
That was great, though. I mean, I thought it was a lot of good information on that, so. What you got?
We had a coordinated houseless response office work session on what the evolution of the office will look like, because we have been notified by the state that they want this pilot project that we're in to evolve into a regional response office. And I guess we're a little bit unique that when we proposed Bend was one of the areas that proposed the pilot language for the legislature. Most all of the other ones that participated in the pilot were regional. We were one of the few that was just Deschutes County. Well, they want us to be regional, and so we have to figure out how to do that. We've already got our strategic plan. We've got 5-year, we've got our membership, we've got bylaws, we've got all this stuff. None of it, of course, works for that. So we had a workshop about that. Then our meeting tomorrow will include the results of that work session and where we want to go with it. There is some controversy on the board about how that happens, so it will be interesting to see tomorrow where people land on it. And then the very next Monday is the regional housing group, not the houseless group, which would probably be the organization that we would not be a subset of necessarily, but
Umbrella.
be umbrella, yeah, to start that regional approach.
And that group's under COIC.
And that group, yeah, is being coordinated by COIC, which ours is as well, is staffed by COIC. So Tammy Maney is really the one working in the background, trying to figure out how to work this so that it's the Charter board, in the sense that we're real concerned about the fact that if we're forced to go regional, that how does that work with Crook County and Jefferson County when their approach to the houseless is very, very different than our approach? And would they even want to participate in it? And if they don't choose to participate, then can we still be considered regional if we come under the Regional Housing Authority? So a lot to be discussed and work out. So, but in order to continue to receive any financing through the legislature, I think that this has to be done. Otherwise, they are not going to look favorably on us. So that will be an evolution that we'll see what's happening.
Like regional better than just county, I guess.
Yeah. And in many things, like our COAC board with transportation, we have been able to work regionally, but I think our feelings about good transportation is different. I think we can agree on that fairly easily. Our opinions about what to do about the houseless can be very, very different.
Very complicated.
So we'll see. Maybe we're imagining something that doesn't exist, but we'll see. Was at the local coordination or group today, and plodding along, trying to come up with a process that we can hopefully come up with some ideas that are based upon what the community wants or sees as a need or has buy-in on, so that we're not constantly having groups bring forward something that the community is not prepared for and is not interested in. So we'll see if we can get there from here. But we're going to make community involvement is going to be a huge part of whatever evolution we're going to come up with for a local ideas on the houseless situation in Sisters, because it is very unique, comparatively speaking. But everybody's pretty much buying in and volunteering and say, yeah, I'll participate. So
I'll piggyback that.
Yeah.
You got anything else?
no,
Okay, I'll piggyback that with, part of what we have to do is educate the public on what we are already doing.
Right.
We have a lot of different organizations, that are doing different things, and sometimes between us, we don't know what we're all doing, you know what I mean, separately. So part of what we're doing is trying to gather information and data, actual data, by doing, some surveying and some other, and everybody writing down, here's what we're already doing, and try and get that information together. So so when we start taking this public, we say, here's what we're doing. Did you know that? And B, what do you think that we can, what's your reaction to that? And, what's your questions and ideas going down the road? And I think that that's how it's going to work. But I just got to tell you, it's all the biggest players in town. Yeah. Lieutenant Davis was there. The chief was there. The ranger was there. It's not Ian. He's got somebody acting ranger because he's out of town for a few months. The county was there. The library was there. 4 people from the city were there. The mayor, the counselor, city manager, assistant city manager, and Rebecca. So there's 5 people from the city there. So, I mean, Helen Klein was there, Sue was there.
Park and Rec.
Yeah, Park, I mean, it was just, everybody's there. And you can't do it better than that. You just can't. Everybody's there. There was nobody missing except somebody that was actually homeless. And that was one thing we got like, oh, well, how do we get that perspective in here? A lot of those people don't feel comfortable coming to meetings or being leaders or whatever. So we're definitely going to try and get some perspectives, even if it's just some short narratives of, hey, here's what our existence is and here's what we want from their perspective. So we'll see how that goes. It's
Right, I had to point out, yes, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Point out that, often in the meetings that I'm in, they do bring somebody in who has been homeless and has worked their way out of it and what their story is, and or who is homeless now. And one of the things that they always bring up is you guys do all this work and do all this planning and come up with all these ideas, but nobody asks us what we want. Nobody asks us what we need.
So that's going to
And
be.
so you're not necessarily targeting what we need because you don't ask us.
There will be a.
And you go, well, yeah, I guess that's true. to some-
So, but didn't SCLI or the Brothers or one of those groups
yeah.
attend? So they
Oh,
do
yeah.
speak. with the
SCY was
people.
there,
Yeah.
Cold Weather Shelter was there,
Right.
but again, they don't talk to everybody. Some groups talk to some and some groups talk to others, and
But I
I
mean, it
think we're gonna
isn't
do a
completely-
coordinated
it is-
effort to try and find out
Yeah.
what they think would be helpful.
Yeah, we're gonna
It's
do a
gonna be,
survey.
it's gonna be a survey.
And they've said, yeah, we'll go out and we'll conduct this survey.
Yeah, so it's gonna
Volunteer.
be, it's certainly more coordinated effort within our own community than it's ever been done. So it's gotta be good. Okay. Thanks for letting us talk about that for a second. I want to kind of go back in time. Hey, I had an OMA conference, back in July 19th. It was right after our last meeting. Well, a week after our last city council meeting, because we'd had the emergency one, but that was, single item. I was there for Zoom, but I was out in North Carolina. I wanted to thank Susan again for the quilt. We made $501 to get a small town mayor next time. So that went really well. And just so you know, the mayor of Paisley is the one that purchased the basket, and he's become a friend of mine now, and I can't wait for him to come in town and spend his gift certificates and do his fun stuff. So maybe you'll get to meet him. I don't know if, depends on when he comes. I also spoke about, our urban growth boundary amendment process, up until that point, last July. And it went really well, and I got a lot of great compliments, and I thought I had just blown it. I just felt like I didn't know enough about it, but apparently I presented it well enough, and thank you for everybody's help with crafting that language and my presentation. LOC actually ended up doing the slideshow for me, 7 slides or something. They nailed it. It was great. Mayor Terry Lenahan from North Plains also spoke there and talked about her difficulties with their urban growth boundary situation. So much so that she recounted how she had actual death threats of somebody came to her front door and said that he was going to harm her. And she got very emotional about that, but that really brought it to home that some people take some of this a little too seriously. I understand it's an emotional thing, and there's a lot of things that people may or may not want, but there's never a need for that. And it was tough. And she's still obviously fighting the good fight and going through the process, and the court case and all that is kind of ancillary to that, but important as well. So, and then the last thing I want to talk about real quick is, you may not have known, COCO, Central Oregon Cities Organization. I'm the vice chair. I'm the co-chair of the water subcommittee. We had a legislative tour here in town on Sunday, and we had 4 legislators, and we had Senator Golden's aide. He was the 5th, but couldn't make it himself, so he sent his aide. and we got to show off the roundabout, talk about transportation issues of what we need here in Sisters. And then we started here, walked over to, the roundabout, and we walked down the path to go to the park, to Creekside Park, and we jaywalked across the highway right there, because there's no crosswalk there, so I just went out there and just shut the thing down to get the 20 people across. And, Kate Fitzgerald from Deschutes County Watershed Council, yeah, DWRC. Yeah. She spoke about the riparian work that we did and a little bit about water rights and things like that, and showed off the bench out there that was dedicated when I was in North Carolina, which is great. That went really well. And then we went to Five Pine and had a little dinner to talk about fire and water issues, but the fire issues became the highlight of the night. And we went over by 20 minutes, so we talked about water for 2 minutes, which is okay because we talk about water a lot at COCO. And we got to talk about fire, and it was really interesting because many of the fire people are super concerned about budgets. And I will give you a statistic about how bad this fire season is. Here you go. Last year was the biggest fire season in acreage that we ever had. It was 2.2 million acres burned between the beginning of the fire season and the end of October. This year, we're at 2.9 million at the end of July. So we're breaking records. Yeah, there's just a lot of things going on. It's massive, and budgets are being killed. And the Jefferson County Fire Chief, who works out of Madras, talked about his budget. He has a firefighting and prevention budget, and then he has EMS. EMS gets no money. So his firefighting budget just includes EMS, and EMS takes 80% of the money. So he only has 20% for fighting fires and prevention. And I think that when I heard that, I was like, man, are we lucky that we have 4 or 5 fire jurisdictions right around us: Cloverdale, Sisters Camp, Sherman, Black Butte Ranch, and then ODF and the federal forest system, right? So we have 5 jurisdictions that anytime we get anything within 10 miles of there, they're jumping on it. And we have 5 different ways to pay for it. And everybody jumps to everybody else's aid. But when you're that small in Madras and you get this big fire right outside of town, it's 50 acres of untreated, unprotected, nasty stuff. He said it went from 1/2 acre to 50 acres in an hour. That's how fast things can go. And if he has less than 50 personnel to start to be the first one there, that's why it's so bad. We're just stretched thin all the way across in manpower and money. Not to mention there's no firefighter pay is not keeping up with everything. Housing is not available or not affordable for some of those seasonal people that come into town. They're sleeping in cars, they're sleeping in tents, they're sleeping in trucks. So we have a really, really bad problem with fire. And I guarantee you, there's going to be discussions at the next legislature about how do we pay for that. You can't just take it all out of the general fund, because the general fund, everybody's asking for money out of that. So we may have to come up with some really inventive ways how to pay for it. I don't know how that's going to happen, but there are millions short, millions and millions and millions short.
And then ODOT is running out of money too.
Oh, yeah. They need to, when they're thinking about laying off people, they may need to lay off people that sit at a desk instead of laying off people that plow our roads, because we need our roads plowed. And that was a very important thing that I talked about when I talked about transportation. Because if they don't plow the roads in the past, it's not just tourism, it's commerce, it's
Safety.
everything, it's all of it. Got to stay open. They have to at least guarantee one road to be open, and that's ours. Not because it's us, but it's the whole east side of the state.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's all I got. Any questions? Let's go home. Nothing to sign. We signed checks.
Yep. Signed them.
We signed them.
You know, Chris Green.
So nothing to sign, right?
Nothing to sign.
Okay.
Yeah, she does.
He's doing the argument.